Hello everyone and welcome back to the Unexplained Diaries. Here on this channel I share real-life encounters with beings from beyond the skies to help you unwind and drift off to sleep. Before we dive in, I would love to hear from you. Leave a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now, find a comfortable spot, relax, and let's begin. I was brushing my teeth when the power cut out. It was around 11:30 p.m. I'd just come in from feeding the goats, and the air had that heavy, quiet feeling it gets out here at night. We're about 6 miles from town, surrounded by open fields and dirt roads. Nearest neighbors maybe half a mile down. When the lights went out, I figured it was just a line issue. We get those sometimes when the wind picks up. But there was no wind, no thunder, no flicker. Just a full stop. The bathroom light blinked out mid-motion, and the hum from the fridge and water heater vanished with it. Even the outside motion sensor light didn't come on when I stepped into the hallway. Just black. I rinsed my mouth in the dark and walked to the front door to see how far the outage went. My phone was charging on the counter, and I left it behind without thinking, which I ended up regretting. Outside, everything looked off. It wasn't just dark, it felt drained. The stars were out, but they seemed dimmer than usual, like someone had thrown a veil over the sky. No bugs, no frogs. Even the goats were quiet. I stood there on the porch for a bit, thinking maybe I should drive into town, let the power company know. But then I heard it. A sound that didn't fit. It wasn't loud. It actually took me a second to realize it was even there. A low hum, almost like a big transformer, but smoother. Constant, no pulsing or breaks. I thought at first it was coming from the fields to the north, where there's an old grain elevator, but when I stepped off the porch and turned toward it, I couldn't place the direction. The sound didn't seem to come from a single spot. It was just around. I walked out into the yard, slow, more curious than anything. The hum wasn't getting louder, but it had weight to it, like I could feel it in my chest if I stood still. I looked up, and for a second I didn't notice anything wrong. But then I realized the stars were missing. Not all of them, just in one big section of the sky, right above me. A huge, uneven black shape, darker than the sky around it, with no lights or reflections, just this moving absence. I didn't even see it move at first. It was that slow. But it was definitely moving, drifting west to east, like a cloud blocking the stars. Except it wasn't shaped like a cloud, and there were no edges I could make out. Just a massive silhouette sliding silently across the sky with that hum following it. I couldn't tell how high up it was. It didn't seem close, but it also didn't look like something that big should be flying that slow. No sound of engines, no lights blinking like on a plane, nothing. I kept staring, not really thinking, just trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Then it stopped. Not entirely. It still drifted a little, but the motion slowed almost to nothing. The hum stayed steady, and I realized it was louder now, even though I hadn't moved. I looked around and saw that the air itself felt strange, like the pressure had changed. Hard to explain, but it was like my ears were plugged, the way they get in an elevator, but more even and soft. I took a step back toward the porch without meaning to. Something about standing there under it started making me nervous. I couldn't see it clearly, but I could feel it. Like being watched, but not from one spot. From everywhere. The goats started bleeding all at once. Loud, frantic. Not their usual cries either. More panicked. I turned toward the pen and saw them clustered in a corner, pressed up against the fence like they were trying to get through it. I'd never seen them like that. The hum got sharper, not louder, but thinner, like a tight wire pulled too far. I felt it in my teeth. I turned to go back inside, but the porch light snapped on as I stepped up and everything went quiet. The hum stopped. The goats went silent. I turned around and the sky looked normal again. Stars back where they should be. No shape, no movement. I stood there for a minute, hand on the doorframe, just staring. The porch light flickered once and held. Inside, the clock on the microwave was blinking 12. Power had come back on. I went in, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. It was at 82%, still charging. No notifications, no missed calls, nothing. I opened the camera app and stepped back outside, but there was nothing to see. I walked to the goat pen with the flashlight. They were still huddled, but quieter now. Their eyes looked wild, like they'd just come out of a thunderstorm. I checked the fence, checked the feed bin, everything was fine. No prints or signs of anything coming near them. I stayed out there for maybe 20 minutes, walking the property, shining the light over the fields, the trees, the road. No sound except my own boots. Nothing out of place, nothing to explain it. The next morning, I checked the power company's outage map online. No reported service disruptions in my area. I called just to be sure, and the rep told me the grid was stable all night. Said maybe my breaker tripped or I had a brownout. I didn't argue. Later that afternoon, I talked to my neighbor down the road, an older guy named Pete. I asked if he lost power the night before. He looked at me funny and said no. Said his lights were on all night and he watched TV till past midnight. That didn't make sense. I can see his house from my backyard. If his lights had been on, I would have seen them. That night, I checked the porch camera. It's motion activated and records in 10-second clips. I scrolled back to the time I remembered the power going out. There was a blank space, just a gap between 11:32 and 11:54. No recordings, nothing. But then I noticed something else. Just before the gap, there's a clip of me walking into the house after feeding the goats. Normal. The next recording, at 11:54, shows the porch light blinking on by itself. No one there. Then the feed continues as normal. I exported the gap anyway, just to have it, even though it's literally nothing. Just black. I don't know what I expected. A few nights later, the goats refused to come out of the shed at dusk. I had to pull 2 of them by the collar just to get them to eat. Same deal the next night. Then they stopped going near the east side of the pen altogether. They still won't. I tried moving their feed bin, thinking maybe a coyote or something had gotten close, but there's never any sign. No tracks, no scat, nothing. I've been sleeping with the blinds closed now, which I never used to do. I keep the porch light on all night. I don't know why. It just feels wrong not to. I haven't seen the shape again. No more hum. Nothing obviously strange. But some nights I swear the stars over the field look off, like they're not in quite the right spot. Could be my imagination. But I notice. It was about 10:45 p.m. when I turned off the highway and headed onto Route 117, just past Grants, New Mexico. I was driving east, trying to make it back to Albuquerque before midnight. I'd spent the day hiking at El Malpais and lost track of time. There's a long stretch of that road that's just flat desert, no gas stations or towns, and barely any traffic. It's not the kind of place you want to break down. I wasn't tired, exactly, but the kind of spacey that happens when you've been staring at road for too long. I kept the radio off, just listening to the wind and the hum of the tires. That part of the desert doesn't have much light pollution, so the stars were out, really out. I had my windows cracked and it was cold, but the fresh air helped me stay alert. About 30 minutes in, I noticed something off to my left. At first, I thought it was just a distant line of houses or maybe a small airstrip. There were these 5 or 6 lights in a straight row, low to the ground, kind of amber colored. Not bright, more like street lights seen from far away. I figured it was a ranch or something and didn't think much of it, but they weren't moving at all. And that's what caught me. I kept glancing at them every few seconds, expecting them to shift position as I moved down the road, but they stayed perfectly level and evenly spaced, like they were fixed in place. After maybe a minute or 2 of watching, I realized they weren't getting any closer or farther. They just stayed exactly the same. That's when I slowed down. I dropped from 70 to around 50 without really thinking about it. I turned off the interior lights to cut the reflection on the windshield, leaned forward and stared at them. They weren't blinking or twinkling like stars, and they weren't headlights. It was too far out in the desert for cars to be just sitting like that. No roads out there. I blinked, just one regular blink. And when I looked again, the lights were gone. Not faded, just gone. I sat up straight and checked the mirrors, and there they were. In the rear view, maybe 100 yards behind me, the exact same row, same spacing, same dull amber glow, only now they were behind me, hovering low above the road. I actually said, "What the hell?" out loud. I looked over my shoulder, but there was nothing on the road. No cars, no signs of movement. but in the mirror the lights were there, as clear as anything. I hit the gas without thinking and sped up to 75, then 80. I kept checking the mirror and the lights stayed exactly the same distance behind me, not bouncing or swaying like headlights would, just hovering. I thought maybe it was a reflection somehow. I rolled down the windows all the way, trying to see if maybe there was something behind me causing it. I even turned the headlights off for a few seconds to see if the reflection would change. Nothing. After another mile or so, the lights started to fade. Not like they were getting farther, just dimming. A few seconds later, they were gone, like they'd been erased. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I kept checking my mirrors every few seconds for the next 10 miles. A little past midnight, I pulled into a gas station on the outskirts of Albuquerque. I hadn't planned on stopping, but I needed to stand under some fluorescent lights and hear other people talking. I didn't mention it to anyone. I just bought a coffee, sat in the parking lot with the engine running, and stared at the windshield for a while. That wasn't the end of it, though. When I got home around 12:40, I parked and walked up to my apartment. I remember noticing how quiet it was. Not just late-night quiet, dead quiet. No cars, no TVs from the windows, not even wind. My porch light was on, but it looked dimmer than usual. Kind of like it was filtered through smoke, except there wasn't any. Inside, everything looked normal. I locked the door behind me, turned on the kitchen light, and sat down on the couch. My phone buzzed a minute later, low battery warning. I plugged it in and saw that I'd missed a call from myself. I stared at the screen for a while, trying to make sense of that. The timestamp said 11:13 p.m., right about when I saw the lights. I never made that call. There was no voicemail, just the missed call log. I went into the details, and it showed my own number as both caller and recipient. Duration, 0 seconds. I don't spoof numbers. I don't even know how to do that. My phone hadn't been touched since before I got back in the car. That night, I left the lights on in the apartment and kept checking the windows. I didn't sleep much. Around 3 a.m., I finally passed out on the couch with the TV on low. Nothing else happened that night. The next morning, I opened Google Maps to check my drive, trying to pinpoint where I'd seen the lights. I remembered the mile markers and traced the route. I dropped a pin near where it happened and zoomed in. There was nothing out there. No buildings, no cell towers, no roads, just empty scrubland. Later that week, I took the same drive again, same time of night, same road, hoping I'd see something that made it make sense, but it was just normal. No lights, no weird reflections, just miles of empty highway. I've got no explanation. All I know is what I saw, a perfect line of amber lights, too low to be anything in the sky, too still to be vehicles, and somehow behind me when I blinked. And that call on my phone. I never deleted it. It's still in my log. I've shown it to a few people. Most of them just shrug and say maybe it was a glitch. But it wasn't. I was there. I remember exactly where I was when it showed up. No other calls before or after it. Just that one right in the middle of nowhere when I was the only car for miles. I've driven that route a few more times since then. Always during the day now, never again at night. My wife was the one who saw it first. Not in person, on the footage. The Sunday night, early January, a little after 10, I was in bed half asleep, and she came in, holding her phone, looking kind of pale. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to me and said, "Watch this." It was from our backyard camera. We've got one of those basic security systems, motion-triggered cams, nothing fancy. One's mounted under the eaves, pointing toward the back fence. It's mostly there for peace of mind. We've had raccoons get into the trash, and once a neighbor's dog dug under the gate. The clip started with the usual grainy black and white view of the yard. Nothing moving at first. Then the floodlights blinked on. They're triggered by motion too, and I assumed it was another raccoon or maybe a cat. But that's not what it showed. The lights flickered for a second, which they don't normally do, then came fully on. The camera picked up something standing just past the fence. Tall, thin, right at the edge of where the yard meets the woods. We live on a little half-acre lot that backs up into county forest land, just trees for miles. The thing didn't move. It didn't look like it was walking or turning or anything. It just stood there, perfectly still. I couldn't make out a face. The frame was kind of blown out from the floodlights, so it was just this pale, vertical shape, too tall to be a person, at least 7 feet. Its arms hung real low, long arms almost to the knees. Then the clip cut to the next frame, less than a second later, and it was gone. Just trees and shadows. The light stayed on, but the thing wasn't there anymore. No movement, no fading out, just not there. I sat up and replayed it a few times. My wife stood next to me, arms crossed, not saying much. I asked if she'd checked the rest of the footage, and she nodded. That was the only trigger all night. We went downstairs and opened the sliding door to the backyard. The lights came on, normal brightness, no flicker. I stepped out in socks and stood by the fence. Nothing looked out of place, no tracks, just patchy grass and a thin layer of frost. We didn't sleep well after that. The next day, I exported the clip to my laptop and tried slowing it down, adjusting the contrast. It didn't help much. The shape didn't sharpen into anything more recognizable. It wasn't a deer, I know that. We get them sometimes, and they move quick, sniff around, twitch their ears, bolt at any noise. This thing wasn't shaped like that. It was upright, way too still. I thought maybe the footage glitched, like maybe the light hit a tree weird or the camera froze for a second. But it didn't feel like a glitch. The lights flickered in and out before and after, but the recording itself played cleanly. 2 nights later, I was up late finishing some work in the den. My wife had gone to bed. Around 1 a.m., I stepped outside to smoke. Only time I do anymore is when I'm stressed. The backyard was quiet, cold again, no wind. I stood near the door under the light, just looking out past the fence. I don't know why, but I had this weird feeling like something was out there. Not like I saw anything, but like being watched. I kept telling myself it was in my head because of the video, but I couldn't shake the thought. I stayed out maybe 5 minutes, then went back in. As soon as I locked the door, the floodlights flicked on behind me. I turned around, heart going fast, but nothing moved. I opened the door again, stepped halfway out, still nothing, just the lights buzzing quietly overhead. I turned in early the next night, didn't go out. The next weird thing happened 3 days later. My wife was getting ready in the morning and called me into the bathroom. She pointed at the mirror, at the fog on the glass. There were streaks in it, vertical lines like finger marks, starting way high up, higher than either of us could reach without standing on something. Not smudges like from our hands, but clean drag marks, almost symmetrical, 4 long ones. No thumb. She thought I was messing with her. I wasn't. I asked if she leaned something against the mirror, like a towel rack or a hanger, but she swore she didn't. I even got a step stool and tried to line up my handprints. Mine didn't match. They were too short. That same day around noon, our backyard camera triggered again. I got the alert on my phone while I was at work. When I checked the clip, all it showed was the lights flickering on, then the image jolting for a split second, like a shake or impact. Then nothing, just empty yard. When I got home that night, I walked the fence line with a flashlight. I found a single branch, one of the thinner pine ones, bent sharply down about 6 feet off the ground. Not snapped, just pulled. There weren't any footprints or broken grass, and the ground was still too hard for tracks. The next few nights were quiet. No footage, no alerts. Then Sunday came again. We had dinner with some friends, got back home around 9. The dog, she's a mutt, part shepherd, ran to the back door and just stood there whining. She's never done that before. Normally she'll bark or scratch to go out, but she just stood there, ears up, tail low. I opened the door and tried to coax her out, but she wouldn't go. Just looked at the yard and backed up slowly. Not scared, exactly. More like unsure. That night, we left the back porch light on. I didn't say anything, but my wife and I both agreed to keep the curtains closed too. At 2:07 a.m., the camera triggered again. This time, the clip was strange in a different way. It started with the lights already on, but not flickering, just steady. The yard was empty, the trees weren't moving, and there wasn't any wind. Then the audio, just background hum, cut out completely for about half a second. Dead silence. The picture didn't change. Nothing entered the frame, but something about it felt off. The shadows shifted a little, like the light bent in the wrong direction for a moment, then snapped back. Like the space was warped. That sounds dumb, I know, but it didn't look right. Then, like the first time, The clip ended. I replayed it a bunch. There's no shape, no figure. Just that feeling again, the one I had outside, like being watched. We turned off the floodlight's motion setting after that, left it on overnight just as a regular light. It stayed steady, no more flickers, no more triggers. I haven't seen the figure since. Nothing new's shown up on the camera. I still check every morning though, just in case. Some nights the dog still sits by the door and watches the yard without making a sound. When she does that, I don't open the door. I just wait a while and make sure the curtains are closed tight. It was a Saturday. I'd been killing time in this thrift store downtown while Melissa was getting her hair done across the street. It's the kind of place that has a little of everything. Old furniture, used DVDs, random electronics, clothes with tags half ripped off. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just bored. I ended up by the back wall where they had a bunch of VHS tapes lined up on a wire rack. Mostly old workout tapes and kids' cartoons, stuff like that. But one stood out because it didn't have a cover, just a blank black case, and inside, the tape had a white label with nothing but a date written in Sharpie. 06/07/1995. That was it. No other markings. I picked it up and flipped it over a few times, but there wasn't anything else on it. I don't know why I bought it, maybe just the weirdness of it. It cost $1. I still had an old VCR in my garage, left over from when I helped clean out my uncle's place. It was one of those TV, DVD/VHS combos, weighed like 50 pounds. I set it up in the living room that night, just to see what was on the tape. Melissa didn't care. She was scrolling through her phone and half watching something on Netflix while I plugged it in. The tape started with a bit of static, then cut to what looked like a grainy outdoor scene. It was a wide shot, almost like it had been filmed from a tripod. Flat land, maybe a field or a stretch of desert, hard to tell. Everything had that washed-out, sun-bleached look that old camcorder footage gets. No people, no animals, no cars, just dry grass and open sky. I sat there watching it for a while, waiting for something to happen. At first, I thought it might be someone's old home video that got taped over halfway through, but it never cut to anything else. It just stayed on that same landscape. The camera didn't pan or zoom, the wind rustled the grass now and then, but otherwise it was completely still. I remember checking the counter on the screen. It had already been rolling for 6 minutes and nothing had changed. Melissa asked what I was watching. I said I didn't know yet. Right around the 9-minute mark, something entered the frame. It came in from the top right corner. Just a shadow at first. I thought maybe a plane was passing overhead, but it didn't move like a plane. It was too slow for one, and there were no blinking lights, no contrail, no sound. It just drifted across the sky like a black shape sliding on glass. The camera didn't move. It stayed locked on the same patch of land, and the thing moved over it at a steady pace. No wings, no tail, just a long, almost oval shape, hard to describe, like a stretched out teardrop, but perfectly smooth. The color was strange too. Flat black, like it absorbed the light around it. It didn't shimmer or reflect anything. I leaned forward and turned up the volume, but there was still no sound. Not from the object, not from the wind, not from anything. It was just silent. The shape passed completely over the field in maybe 20 seconds, then disappeared off the top left of the screen. It didn't change speed, or dip, or rise, just kept gliding and vanished the same way it came in. And that was it. The camera stayed on the empty field for another minute or so, then the screen went to static again. The tape stopped by itself. I rewound it and played it again. Same thing, same timing, same silence, same shape. Melissa finally looked up from her phone and asked if it was a movie or something. I told her no, I'd found it at the thrift store. She watched it with me the second time. When the shape came in again, she sat up straighter. Neither of us said anything until the tape ended. Then she asked, "Was that a blimp?" It wasn't a blimp. We both knew it, but I said maybe. Just to have something to say. We watched it again, slower this time. I tried to pause it a few times while the thing was on screen, but the frames always came out weird. Like the tape glitched when it was in the middle of the frame. The black shape would get blurry or jitter slightly, even though the rest of the screen stayed clear. I don't think it was a tracking issue. The tape looked fine otherwise. It was just that part. Every time the object was centered, the picture seemed off somehow. I left the VCR plugged in that night, thinking I might digitize the footage later. I didn't have a capture card or anything, but figured I could find someone who did, just to have a copy. I didn't get around to it for a couple days. Work got busy. I kind of forgot about it. Then on Wednesday, I went back to play it again. When I pressed play, it showed static for a few seconds, then black. Not like the tape was blank, more like the camera lens had been covered. I let it roll for a bit. Nothing. I checked the counter. It was counting time, but no image. I rewound it and tried again. Same thing. Black screen. No field, no sound, nothing. I tried fast forwarding to where the shape had shown up, just to see if it glitched out or something, but it stayed black the whole way. Just a faint hiss of white noise. I ejected the tape and checked the reel. It hadn't broken. It was still wound tight. I don't know how to explain it. It just stopped showing anything. Melissa thought I was messing with her when I told her it was gone. She sat down and watched the tape with me again, and when it played nothing, she asked if I'd taped over it. I said no. I hadn't touched it. We argued for a bit. Then I shut it off. That weekend, I went back to the thrift store to ask about it, but the guy behind the counter just shrugged, said they get boxes of tapes all the time, most of them donated in bulk. He didn't remember anything specific about the one I bought. I left my number in case more came in with just dates written on them. He never called. The VCR still works. I tried it with a few other tapes just to check. All of them play fine. It's only that one that stopped working. I still have it on a shelf in the garage. Every once in a while I think about playing it again, but I don't. The label's faded now. You can still read the date. Barely. But the ink's almost rubbed off. I didn't write over it. I didn't erase it. But the footage is gone. Whatever was on there, it's not there anymore. I was hiking solo in the Ochoko National Forest last September. It was something I'd done a few times before. Nothing hardcore, just a long weekend by myself to reset. I'd been dealing with a lot of work stuff and I just needed to be away from screens and noise. I planned a 3-day route and packed light, tent, stove, bear spray, Garmin, all the usual stuff. On the second day, I'd already done most of the mileage I wanted to get through by mid-afternoon. I was somewhere along the Fremont Point Trail, not far from one of the dry ridges where you can see out across the basin. I was just walking, no headphones or anything, when I noticed this faint buzzing sound above me. At first I figured it was just a wasp or something flying nearby, nothing weird. I ignored it and kept going, but it didn't fade like it usually does. It stayed at the same volume as I walked, which made me stop and glance up. There was something about 50 or 60 feet above the trail, almost directly overhead. My first thought was drone. It was grayish and small, maybe 3 feet across, and just sitting there in the sky. That buzzing wasn't loud. It sounded more like the hum from a power line when you're standing right under it. Constant, flat, kind of tinny. I stood still, watching it, expecting it to move or shift or do something, but it didn't. It was completely motionless, not even a little bobble in the air like drones usually have. No tilt, no wind correction, just locked in place like it was nailed to the sky. I watched it for probably 30 seconds before I realized something was off. The buzzing wasn't directional. It wasn't coming from the object. It was just there, all around me, like background noise in a room. And now that I was really paying attention, I noticed there was no other sound. No birds, no wind. Even the trees were still. Just that weird, low hum pressing into everything. I took a few slow steps backward, half expecting it to follow me, but it didn't. It just stayed in the same exact spot, like it didn't register that I'd moved. I got this uncomfortable thought that maybe it wasn't looking at me. Maybe it was just there. Like it wasn't aware of me at all, or maybe it was too aware. I looked down for a second to check my Garmin. The screen was black. I tapped the power button, but nothing happened. It had a full charge that morning and had been working fine. That gave me a weird jolt of adrenaline, but I tried not to panic. I pulled my phone out of the top of my pack. It was on, but the screen was frozen on the lock screen and the time wasn't moving. I tried the buttons. Nothing responded. I looked back up. It was still there. Same spot. Still not moving. Still no sound except that hum. I decided to just keep walking. I didn't want to run, but I also didn't want to stand still any longer. As I moved, I didn't look up again. I just focused on the trail and kept a steady pace for maybe 15 minutes. The buzzing faded slowly until I noticed the wind again. A bird called off somewhere behind me. When I finally glanced back, there was nothing in the sky. I stopped and checked my Garmin again. It turned on like normal. The time had jumped ahead almost 45 minutes from when I last remembered checking it. My phone was back to normal too, but the battery had dropped from 80% to 19%. I hadn't used it all day. I kept hiking. I wasn't scared exactly, just really off balance. Nothing else happened the rest of that afternoon, but I couldn't stop thinking about how unnatural it felt, how completely still that thing had been. I kept running through possibilities. Weird experimental drone, weather balloon. Maybe I was dehydrated and imagining things. But none of it quite fit. That night, I camped a little off-trail in a stand of lodgepole pines. Normal spot. I'd stayed there once before. I made dinner, read a few pages of a paperback, climbed into my sleeping bag just after sunset. I fell asleep easy, but woke up sometime later. It wasn't a noise that woke me, more like the sudden sense that I'd been dreaming and then, without a transition, was awake and alert. There was no sound outside the tent, no wind, no branches creaking, just that same low hum I'd heard earlier, but even quieter, like it was deeper underground or farther away. I didn't unzip the tent. I just lay there, completely still, listening. I don't know how long I stayed awake, but eventually I must have drifted off again. When I woke up for real the next morning, the air felt normal. Birds were chirping, and the sun was already warming up the tent. I packed up fast and cut the trip a day short. I hiked back to the trailhead without stopping. No more strange sounds or sightings. I passed one older couple on horseback near the lower trail and thought about asking if they'd seen anything weird, but I didn't say anything. Back at home, I tried looking up any kind of drone that could hover perfectly still without sound. I even posted on a hiking forum, just describing it as a stationary, buzzing object overhead. Got a few replies suggesting camera drones or quadcopters, but nothing that matched the silence or the weird loss of sound in time. I haven't been back to that trail. I've done other hikes, even solo ones, and nothing like that's happened since. But I do catch myself checking the sky more often than I used to. And when I hear a buzz, even just from a power transformer or a lawn tool, I get this tight feeling in my stomach, like I'm waiting for something to show up again. I woke up with this weird pressure in my chest, like I'd been holding my breath. It was dead quiet, which I noticed right away because that's not normal out there. Usually the forest's full of small sounds at night, crickets, wind, trees creaking a little. This was total silence, like someone had hit mute on the whole place. I'd set up camp just off an old trail in northern Oregon. Nothing official, just a flat spot off the path I'd hiked before. I liked it because it was quiet and not too far from the creek, and I'd never seen anyone else out there, even on weekends. I brought my dog, Marley, like always, and she'd passed out right after sunset. I didn't have a clock on me, but I'm guessing it was maybe 2 or 3 in the morning when I woke up. The first thing I noticed, besides the quiet, was this pale blue light filling the tent. I thought it might have been the moon at first, but the rainfly was on, and the light didn't flicker or shift like moonlight. It was just this soft, steady glow, like the inside of the tent itself was lit up, but there wasn't any clear source. I checked my lantern. It was off. My phone was in my boot, powered down to save battery. Marley was sitting up, ears high, completely still. That kind of stillness that doesn't feel like normal alertness. It was more like she was frozen. I whispered her name, and she didn't turn, didn't blink. Just kept staring at the wall of the tent, opposite where I was laying. The air felt not cold, but dense, like walking into a room where someone's just had a serious argument. That kind of tension. I got the feeling, really strong, that something was nearby, watching. Not like an animal outside the tent, not movement, just this solid feeling that I wasn't alone. I didn't move for a while. I just laid there, trying to listen, but there was nothing. Not even my own breathing sounded right. It was like my ears weren't picking up the inside of the tent, just this low hum in my head. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure that I couldn't shake. I reached for the zipper to the tent door real slow, more out of habit than anything else, but as soon as I touched the fabric, the light dimmed. Not all at once, just faded, like it was retreating. Marley let out this low whine, but still didn't move. I froze again, hand on the zipper, waiting for something to happen. A shadow, a sound, anything. But nothing did. The light just kept dimming until it was gone. Not dark like night dark, though. It was darker, like the kind of dark where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. I sat there for maybe 5 minutes, not daring to unzip the door, not really sure what I'd do if I did. Eventually, I turned on my lantern. The regular yellow light felt harsh after that blue glow, but comforting. Marley finally moved a little, kind of shifted closer to me, and leaned against my leg, still quiet. Her breathing was shallow, like she was scared. I waited till sunrise to go outside. I didn't sleep. I just sat there with the lantern on, listening to absolutely nothing. It stayed silent outside until maybe 30 minutes before dawn, and then all at once, the regular forest sounds started coming back. Birds, wind in the trees, a branch creaking somewhere, just like normal. When I finally stepped out, everything looked the same. No prints around the tent, no broken branches, no sign anyone had been there. Marley stayed close to my side, tail low, sniffing the air but not barking. I packed up quick and headed back to the trail. The whole hike out, I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing there, except once. About halfway back to the car, there's a little clearing I usually stop at to rest. I wasn't planning to stop, but Marley froze just before we reached it. Wouldn't move. I crouched down to check her out, thinking maybe she hurt her paw, but she was staring into the trees. Same kind of stare she gave inside the tent. I looked, didn't see anything, but I swear the air in that spot felt wrong again. Same pressure, same stillness. I made a wide circle around the clearing. Marley didn't start walking again until we were past it. Back at the car, I checked my phone. No notifications, which was normal for out there, but the time was off. It showed 6:42 a.m., which didn't line up. Based on how early the sun had come up and how fast I hiked out, it should have been closer to 8. I reset the phone and it corrected itself to 8:09. I don't know what caused the lag. Marley slept the whole drive home. I kept expecting her to perk up, but she just curled up in the back seat and didn't move until we pulled into the driveway. She was quiet the next few days. Ate normally, no limping or anything like that, but she wouldn't go into the backyard at night, which she'd never had a problem with before. I didn't tell anyone for a while. I didn't really know how to describe it. I kept trying to find a practical explanation. Bioluminescence? Some weird reflection from my lantern that's stuck in my eyes? Static discharge from the tent poles? But nothing really made sense, especially the way the sound disappeared and how Marley reacted. The next time I camped was months later in a totally different part of the state. I brought the same gear, same tent, same lantern. Everything worked normal. No weird light, no silence, no pressure. Marley was fine, but I haven't gone back to that original trail since. I've thought about it a few times, looked at maps, even packed the car once, but something always makes me change my mind last minute. Not fear exactly, just a heavy feeling, like that place isn't empty the way the rest of the woods are, like something is still there, waiting. We were out in the field behind Melissa's place. This was maybe a year and a half ago, late summer. Her parents own a bunch of land outside Stillwater, mostly pasture with some woods around the back fence. And it's far enough from town that you can see the sky real clear, no light pollution. You lay out there on a clear night and it looks like someone dumped a bucket of stars over the sky. Anyway, we'd done this a few times before, brought a couple of blankets, maybe some drinks, lay in the grass and just watched. That night, we didn't even plan it. We were inside watching some movie, but the power flickered from a storm earlier in the day and the internet kept cutting out. Around 9 or so, I asked if she wanted to go out and look at the stars instead. She said yeah, grabbed a hoodie, and we walked out to the south field. It was quiet. No cows that season, so we didn't have to worry about stepping in anything or waking them up. It had rained earlier, like I said, but the grass had mostly dried out. You could still smell it though, wet hay and mud. There was a slight breeze, nothing strong. No bugs, surprisingly. We laid the blankets out and just stared up for a while. Talked about nothing. I remember pointing out some planes at one point, little red blips moving slow across the sky, and we tried to guess where they were headed. Stuff like that. Around 10:30, maybe closer to 11, the sky got really clear, like sharper somehow. The stars seemed brighter than usual. I know that sounds dumb, but it's the only way I can put it. Like someone adjusted the contrast. I noticed the weird one first. We were both laying flat, heads side by side, and I saw something up there that didn't look quite right. It was just one of the stars at first. Middle of the sky, not near any constellations I recognized. I wouldn't have thought anything of it if it hadn't started moving. Not side to side like a satellite or a plane, just straight down. I thought maybe my eyes were messing with me, so I nudged Melissa and pointed. She squinted at it for a few seconds and went, "Wait, what's that one doing?" We both sat up a little. The star, if that's even what it was descending slowly. Not falling, not streaking, just a steady vertical drop. No blinking lights, no tail, no sound at all. It wasn't bright enough to light anything up, but it was way too bright to be a drone or a weather balloon or whatever. And it wasn't losing altitude the way something normally would. There was no arc, no speed up, no wobble, just a perfect line down through the sky. I kept expecting it to accelerate or fade or something, but it stayed the same brightness the whole time. I remember thinking it looked fake, almost like a cursor being dragged down a screen. Then it just vanished. No flicker, no trail, no blur. It didn't dip behind the tree line or disappear behind clouds. It just wasn't there anymore. 1 second it was moving, the next it was gone. Melissa looked at me and said, "Did you see it blink out?" And I just nodded. I didn't know what to say. We sat there for a minute not talking. It wasn't scary exactly, just off, like our brains couldn't process it. Then she pulled out her phone to try and film the sky in case something else happened, but of course you can't see anything on those screens. Just black with a couple pixels of light. A few minutes later, we saw another thing. Off to the right, maybe 30 degrees up, something flashed once. Not like lightning or a plane. It was more like a camera flash, bright and white but super quick. Then silence again. I asked her if it could have been a meteor, but she shook her head. "Meteors don't do that," she said. "They don't flash once and stop." I didn't have an answer. We stayed out there another 20 minutes or so. Didn't see anything else move, but we kept hearing little sounds behind us in the grass. Not big animals, just little rustles, like something shifting a few feet away and then stopping when we turned. We packed up and walked back slowly. Neither of us said much. It didn't feel right to talk, like we'd break something by doing that. The lights were on in the house, warm and yellow through the windows, and I remember feeling kind of relieved when we stepped back inside. Not even for any specific reason, it just felt normal again in there. We didn't talk about it much the next day. I think I brought it up once, said something like, "Still weirded out by that star thing." And she said, yeah, she'd thought about it all night. That was about it. A week or so later, I tried looking up satellite movements and ISS flyovers for that area and time. Nothing matched. I thought maybe it had been a flare or a drone, but I couldn't find anything that moved like that. Perfect vertical descent with no change in speed, no noise, no tail. I asked a friend who's into astronomy if he'd ever seen a star just drop out of the sky like that. He laughed and said, "Stars don't move. Not like that." I didn't press it. We haven't gone back out to that field at night since then. Not because we're scared, really. Just, we haven't. Every time we talk about stargazing again, one of us makes an excuse. I think we're both waiting for the other to say it first. We set up camp just after dusk in this little clearing about 2 miles off the main trail. It was me and 3 friends, Mike, Jen, and Dave, just a quick weekend getaway to get away from the city noise. Nothing fancy. We picked this spot because it was open enough to pitch the tents, but surrounded by thick woods, so we figured we'd get some privacy. The first few hours were normal. We built a fire, grilled some burgers, drank a couple of beers. It was cool out, early fall, crisp air, the usual crackling fire sounds, some crickets in the background. We told stories, laughed a bit, then started to wind down around 10:30. I was the last one to crawl into my sleeping bag inside my tent. The others had theirs set up nearby, just a few yards apart. The forest was quiet, dark except for the fire's fading glow and a sliver of moonlight. I was just drifting off when I noticed something strange. There was this clicking sound, like someone tapping their fingernails on a glass bottle, only more deliberate, rhythmic. It was soft but clear enough to cut through the quiet. At first, I thought maybe one of the guys was messing around or some kind of insect, but the pattern was too steady, like a slow metronome ticking in the dark. I pulled back the tent flap a bit and shone my flashlight outside. The fire was dead by now, just embers glowing. I didn't see anyone. The woods were still. No animals, no movement. I woke Mike up and asked if he heard it. He was quiet for a minute, then nodded. Jen and Dave were awake too, all of us suddenly alert. We all stepped outside, flashlights sweeping the tree line. The noise stopped as soon as we moved, like it vanished into the night. We looked around for anything. A woodpecker maybe, or some kind of critter, but nothing. Just trees and shadows. Probably just some weird animal, Mike said, but none of us sounded convinced. We went back inside the tents, doors zipped up tight. 10 minutes later, the clicking started again. Same pattern, same slow rhythm. Except this time it sounded like it was moving, circling the tents. Around and around, slow and steady. I swear, you could almost track it if you tried. Like it was walking a path just beyond the tree line, keeping pace. Every now and then it paused, then picked up again. We all stayed silent, listening. The sound wasn't loud, but it was close enough to be unsettling. Not right next to the tent, but near enough to make you wonder if something was watching. After maybe 15 minutes, Jen said, "I'm going outside to check." Nobody stopped her. She unzipped her tent and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The clicking stopped immediately. "Nothing here," she said, voice low, shining her light into the woods. No animals, no movement. We stayed out there for a few more minutes, walking a small circle around the campsite. It was dead silent except for the rustle of leaves underfoot. Finally, we went back in. The tents zipped up. We kept talking softly for a bit, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Then it stopped. For the next hour, nothing. No sounds, no movement. We relaxed, thought maybe it was just a one-off thing, some animal wandering by or a weird echo. But then, right as we were drifting back to sleep, the clicking came back. Same rhythm, same slow circle. It was like the sound had a mind of its own, appearing only when it wanted. This time, it felt different, closer, more deliberate, like something was pacing us, but not stepping on twigs or leaves. Just that steady tapping, almost mechanical. We lay there frozen, listening. I could hear Dave's breathing quicken in the tent next to me. After a while, Mike whispered, "We should check again." I didn't want to, but I nodded. We all slipped out, flashlights on, scanning the trees. The clicking stopped again the second we moved. We searched for a while, but it was like chasing a ghost. No footprints, no animals, no signs of anything. Just that eerie silence. We got back inside and agreed to keep our phones close. None of us wanted to admit how weird it felt. Over the next hour, the clicking came and went a few more times, always stopping the moment we moved or turned on a light. At one point, I looked at my watch. I swear, an hour had passed, but the night felt heavier, slower, like time was dragging or stretching. By 4 a.m., the noise finally stopped for good. We didn't sleep much after that. Too alert, too on edge. In the morning, we packed up quickly. We didn't talk much about it, just agreed maybe it was some weird animal or the forest playing tricks. Back home, I kept thinking about that sound, how it moved around us but stayed just out of reach, how it stopped whenever we tried to find it. I still don't know what it was. None of us do. It wasn't a bird, not a woodpecker. It wasn't a person or another camper. Nothing left tracks or signs. Just that clicking, like something circling, watching, but never close enough to see. I pulled into the rest stop a little past 1 a.m., just west of Amarillo. It was one of those small ones off I-40, with maybe 8 truck slots, a single bathroom, and a couple vending machines that looked like they hadn't been stocked since COVID. I'd been on the road close to 11 hours by that point, hauling a refrigerated load from Oklahoma City to Flagstaff. It was the last stretch of my shift, and I'd planned to sleep a few hours there before finishing it out in the morning. I remember checking my logbook, then killing the engine and climbing into the sleeper. I had the vent fan going low and a small LED light clipped to the side for a bit of reading. I didn't bother setting an alarm since my internal clock usually wakes me up every 2 or 3 hours on the dot. I planned to sleep until around 4:30 or 5 and then roll out before the sun got too high. I fell asleep quick, the kind of crash sleep that hits after a long day of driving in that heat. Next thing I knew, I was wide awake again, sitting upright in the driver's seat. I wasn't groggy or confused, just suddenly there, hands in my lap, eyes wide open like I'd been awake the whole time. The engine was off. The keys were still in the ignition, but nothing was running. No hum, no AC, no dash lights. It was pitch black outside except for a dim yellow bulb over the rest stop bathroom about 50 yards ahead. The fan in the back wasn't running anymore either. I reached back to check my phone on the charger. It was at 87%, and the lock screen said 3:27 a.m. I couldn't figure out how I'd gotten up to the front. I usually sleep hard in the bunk, and I've never woken up already in the driver's seat before. I checked my pockets, wallet still there, nothing missing or out of place. That's when I thought to check the dash cam. I run one of those Garmin dual-facing setups, front view and cabin view, both recording to a micro SD. It's saved my ass more than once with company reports, so I keep it running basically anytime I'm in the truck. I hit the playback. The front-facing footage was normal. Dark road, pulling into the rest stop, headlights catching the back of another rig as I parked. Cabin view showed me doing the usual, logbook, rubbing my face, stretching, then heading into the sleeper. That part all made sense. Then at exactly 1:14 a.m. the recording just stopped. No glitch or error message, just a clean break. The next frame jumped to 3:27 a.m., same time as my phone, with me already sitting in the driver's seat. No transition, just me there, staring straight ahead, hands in my lap. I rewatched that gap like 10 times. There was no in-between, no movement or audio, just 2 hours gone. I even ejected the SD card and checked the files on my laptop. Same thing, the timestamps jumped exactly 2 hours and 13 seconds forward. No corrupted files, no partials, nothing. I sat there for a while, just letting the fan run and trying to figure out what could have happened. I don't sleepwalk, never have. I've done thousands of nights in that bunk, and I've never once woken up in the driver's seat. And if I'd moved up front in my sleep, the camera should have caught it, but it didn't. It was like someone cut out a clean section of the footage and hit record again exactly when I opened my eyes. Around 3:45, I got out of the cab to stretch my legs and check the truck. Everything looked normal. Trailer still sealed. No signs of tampering. I even walked around the edge of the lot with my flashlight, just out of instinct more than anything. It was dead quiet, no wind, no bugs. One other trucker's rig was parked diagonally across from mine, lights off, curtains drawn. Nobody moved. I went into the bathroom just to splash water on my face. The fluorescent light in there was flickering slightly, which I hadn't noticed before. It buzzed loud, one of those high, broken buzzes. I looked in the mirror and just stood there a minute. I didn't look tired, which was weird. Normally after 2 hours of sleep, I look like hell. But I looked fresh, like I'd just gotten a full night. Back in the truck, I tried to shake it off, started the engine, checked all systems. Everything ran fine. I got back on I-40 about 10 minutes later and drove straight through to Flagstaff without stopping. Didn't even grab coffee like I usually do around Gallup. Later that day, I tried to show the dashcam footage to a guy I know at dispatch. He's kind of a tech nerd and usually likes that stuff. But when I went to pull it up, the file from that night was missing completely. The folder was still there, but the clips stopped at 1:14 a.m. No jump, no 3:27 footage, nothing. I hadn't deleted anything. The SD card had space left, and all the other days were intact. I ran a recovery program on the drive that night at the motel. It pulled up some corrupted files labeled with gibberish characters, stuff like vid, but they wouldn't open and they didn't have timestamps, just junk data like something had overwritten them. I didn't tell anyone else at work. I just logged my hours like normal and kept going. I've stopped at that same rest stop twice since then, once during the day and once at night, and nothing weird happened either time. But I don't sleep there anymore. I just use the bathroom and move on. I don't even shut the engine off. It happened last fall, around mid-October. I'd started jogging at night after work to clear my head. I live in a small town just outside of Asheville, and there's this paved trail that runs along the edge of a wooded park. It's not isolated exactly, but it gets real quiet after 9 p.m., especially on weekdays. That night, I didn't start my run until a little after 10. I remember because I checked my watch at the trailhead, 10:12. It was cold enough that I wore gloves and a hoodie, but not freezing yet. The kind of cold where your breath hangs in the air and the tips of your ears sting after 20 minutes. The path is about 3 miles, with a loop at the end, so I usually run out and back. There are lampposts for the first half mile, and then it's just moonlight and the occasional security light from a house in the distance. No one else was out that night. No cars on the nearby road, no bikes, no other joggers. The first part of the run felt normal. I had my earbuds in, music low enough to still hear my footsteps. About 15 minutes in, I reached the far end of the loop and slowed down to catch my breath. There's a bench there, and I usually pause for a minute before heading back. I stood there breathing, staring off at the tree line. That's when I noticed something. Red light. Not bright. Dim, like taillights through fog, but steady. I thought it was a cell tower at first. There's one a couple miles north, but it's never looked that close, and it didn't blink, just hung there. I pulled out my earbuds and stepped off the trail a bit to get a better view. That's when I saw there were 3 lights, not one. They formed a perfect triangle, wide, maybe the length of a football field across, though it was hard to judge with nothing else lit up around it. They weren't on the tower. They were floating above the trees. The lights didn't move. They just hovered. The triangle wasn't tilted or spinning, just there. Solid. Dead silent. I looked around to see if maybe someone else was nearby, but the woods were dark and still. No wind, no crickets, no branches moving. It was the kind of quiet where your ears start ringing a little. I watched the lights for maybe 30 seconds before one of them slowly rotated around the others. Not fast, just a smooth motion like a second hand ticking on a big clock. Then it stopped, and another light took its place, rotating the same way. It was like they were taking turns moving. That's when I felt it. This weird pressure in my chest, like standing too close to a speaker, but there was no sound. I don't know how else to explain it. Just a heavy, low thump I couldn't hear but could feel. It came in pulses. I counted 5 of them, spaced about 10 seconds apart. The clouds were rolling in from the west. Thin at first, just wispy streaks, but thickening fast. The moon dimmed behind them, and one by one, the red lights started fading. Not blinking out, fading. Like someone slowly turned down a dimmer switch. First, the top one disappeared into the haze. Then the second, lower right. The last one, lower left, held for a moment longer and then vanished, just as a thicker cloud passed through. I stood there for a minute, trying to see if they'd come back, but the sky was fully covered by then. Nothing above but dark gray. Still no sound, not even leaves rustling. Just that pressure feeling, lingering, like it didn't want to leave yet. I finally turned back toward the trail. My legs were cold. I felt stupid standing there, like I was waiting for something that wasn't coming back. I put my earbuds in again but didn't press play. Just started jogging, fast. I didn't look back. About halfway down the trail, I passed under the first lamppost again. That's when I noticed something else. There was a shape on the path ahead, dark, low to the ground. I slowed, thinking maybe it was a dog or someone sitting. But as I got closer, I saw it wasn't either. It was a pile of leaves, but in a weird spot, right in the middle of the trail, too even, like it had been swept there. There were no other piles like it anywhere nearby. I ran past it, didn't stop. I don't know why, but it bothered me more than it should have. It looked arranged, like someone had meant for it to be there. Back at the parking lot, my car was the only one left. The lot's next to a field, and across that is a small playground with a chain link fence around it. As I was unlocking my door, I caught something in the corner of my eye, movement near the swings. I turned. Nothing was moving, but one of the swings, the one closest to the fence, was slightly tilted, not swinging, just tilted like someone had pulled it back and let go, but with no momentum. It just hung there, slightly off-center. I got in the car and locked the doors. On the drive home, my radio wouldn't pick up anything, not even static. I tried scanning through the FM range, then AM. Just silence. The screen lit up like it was working, but no stations. I turned it off after a while. When I got home, Melissa was already asleep. I showered, then checked the weather on my phone, said cloud cover moved in just after 10:40. That lined up, but no reports of anything unusual, no power outages, no aircraft alerts, nothing. I went out the next day and ran the same trail, mid-morning. It all looked normal. No red lights. The pile of leaves was gone. Probably just wind, I told myself. Probably someone else ran through and scattered it. I didn't run at night for a while after that. Not because I was scared exactly. I just couldn't stop thinking about how quiet it got. How something could be right there above the trees, completely still, with no noise. Nothing natural stays that still. Nothing natural rotates like that. I tried looking it up a few times. Drone formations, military tests, stuff like that, but nothing matched. Everything I found either had blinking lights or made noise or wasn't capable of hovering that smoothly for that long. And those lights were too far apart for it to be one drone, unless it wasn't one thing at all. Anyway, I'm back to running during the day now. Still take that trail sometimes, still glance up at the trees when I hit the far loop. Just to check. I was out driving late that night, chasing a thunderstorm that was rolling through the area. I'm into storm photography, nothing professional, just a hobby. I like how unpredictable it is, how the sky suddenly lights up and changes. The roads were mostly empty and the air smelled like rain. The kind of night where everything feels quiet except for the low rumble of thunder in the distance. I pulled over on the side of a country road with my camera and tripod. The storm was about 10 miles away, moving toward me slowly. I set up my gear and started taking pictures, focusing on the flashes of lightning that cracked the clouds open. I was shooting in intervals, trying to catch the bright strikes that would light up the whole sky. After about an hour, I packed up and headed back home. I was tired, but satisfied, thinking I'd gotten some good shots. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was reviewing the photos on my computer, that I noticed something strange. There were 3 frames, all taken within a few minutes of each other, where a dark shape appeared in the clouds. It wasn't like a normal cloud shadow or a bird. It was an angular shape, almost like a distorted rectangle or a block, hanging in the sky. The edges were sharp, not soft like clouds. It was black against the lighter background, and it seemed to float there in the middle of the storm. I went back to the original files and zoomed in, trying to see if it was just a glitch or some kind of lens artifact, but it was consistent across the 3 pictures, taken seconds apart from slightly different angles. And the weirdest part was, I didn't notice it at all when I was out there. I was staring at the sky for hours, watching the lightning, but this shape never caught my eye. I showed the photos to a few friends who do photography, and some thought it might be a camera artifact or a reflection inside the lens. But it didn't look like any flare or lens ghosting I'd seen before. And it didn't change or move between shots, it just stayed in the same spot. That day, I kept thinking about it and went back over the pictures frame by frame, trying to find any hint of movement or explanation. Nothing. The shape was just there. The clouds moved around it, lightning flashed nearby, but it stayed the same, like it was suspended in the sky, completely still. I decided to go back to the spot where I'd been photographing the storm, just to see if there was anything odd in the area. Maybe some weird atmospheric condition or something on the road that could explain what I'd seen. When I got there during the afternoon, the sky was clear and there was nothing unusual. Just trees, fields, and the usual sounds of birds. I walked around the area, checking the horizon, scanning the treetops, but everything looked normal. No strange structures or anything that could create shadows or reflections like in the photos. It was just a typical rural stretch. That night, I thought maybe I'd try photographing again. I went back out, set up in the same spot, hoping to catch something else or maybe figure out if it was a one-time thing. The storm came and went, and this time I didn't see or capture anything like that shape. The lightning flashed normally. The clouds rolled in patterns I recognized, and no strange shapes showed up. I checked my gear too, looking for anything that might cause weird images. The lens was clean, no scratches or damage. The camera settings were the same as usual. Everything looked normal. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I felt. That shape didn't look natural, and I'm pretty familiar with clouds and storms. It was out of place, but at the same time, it wasn't like it was glowing or moving or doing anything active. It just existed there in those frames. I kept going back to the photos, noticing small things I hadn't before. The way the lightning illuminated the edges of the shape, just slightly, but only on some sides, like it was partially blocking the light. Sometimes it looked like there was a faint outline of something extending down from it, but the darkness around it made it hard to tell. I didn't tell many people about it, mostly because I wasn't sure what to say. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to crazy conclusions, and I don't like sounding paranoid. But I kept that shape in the back of my mind, the way it hovered in the clouds without explanation. A few weeks later, I was at a local coffee shop, showing a friend the pictures on my phone. He's into local news and weird stuff and got really interested when I showed him the frames. He asked if I'd checked with any weather stations or radar data from that night. I hadn't, so I looked up the radar archives. The storm was real, moving as expected, no odd signals or blips that night. Nothing reported in that area that would hint at something strange. Still, the shape remained. It wasn't just in my head or a camera malfunction. I had 3 clear frames of it and I couldn't explain it. Sometimes I wondered if it was some kind of drone or experimental aircraft, but nothing about it suggested normal aviation. No lights, no sound when I was out there, and no movement. Other times I thought maybe it was some kind of optical illusion created by the storm itself, an odd cloud formation or shadow from another cloud layer. But I've been watching storms for years, and this was different, too defined, too solid looking. In the end, I didn't get any answers. The photos stayed on my hard drive, and I never saw anything like that shape again. Every now and then I go back and stare at those frames, trying to convince myself it was just a trick of the light or a lens glitch, but I'm not sure. It's just there, 3 images of a black, angular shape floating silently in the storm clouds, showing up in the middle of a lightning chase on a quiet country road. I don't know what it was, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened, and honestly, I'm still not sure what I saw. It wasn't some big flashy thing, more like something small, quiet, and weird enough to make me double-check my own eyes. It was late summer, early evening. The sun had just set, but there was still some light left, that blue hour kind of glow. I was hanging out in my backyard, just messing around before dinner. Our backyard backed up to this little patch of woods, not a forest or anything, just a handful of trees that lined the edge of the property. Sometimes I'd go back there with my dog or just explore. That night, I was sitting on the grass near the fence, watching fireflies flicker around. Pretty normal stuff. But then I noticed something else, a small dot of light hovering just at the tree line. At first, I thought it might be a firefly or a bug caught in some weird way, but it wasn't blinking or flickering like the others. It was just steady, a soft white light. I stared at it for a while. It stayed in the same spot, just floating maybe a foot or 2 above the ground, right behind the biggest tree at the edge. The light was small, maybe the size of a marble, and it pulsed gently, like it was breathing or alive in some way. It didn't move side to side, just stayed there, pulsing evenly. I felt weirdly drawn to it, but also nervous. I didn't want to get up and walk into the woods alone, so I just sat there and watched. The light stayed steady for what felt like a few minutes. I remember the sounds of crickets and the faint rustling of leaves, but the light didn't change or flicker like any insect I'd ever seen. Then, without warning, the light started to rise. It didn't float sideways or drift with the breeze. It went straight up, slow and steady, passing the tops of the trees like they weren't even there. I blinked, expecting maybe it was some kind of drone or balloon, but the way it moved was too smooth, too deliberate. As it rose, the light got smaller, just a pinprick against the darkening sky. Then it disappeared completely, like it just vanished into thin air. I sat there for a few minutes after that, waiting to see if it would come back or if something else would happen. Nothing. The woods were silent, the night settling in as usual. Eventually, I went back inside. I told my parents about it, but they just said I was probably seeing things or imagining stuff. I tried explaining the way it pulsed and rose straight up, but they didn't seem interested. My friends thought I was making it up or confusing it with a firefly. Later, I kept thinking about it. The pulsing light didn't feel natural, and the way it rose didn't match anything I knew. I've gone back to that backyard dozens of times since then, but I never saw anything like it again. Sometimes, when it gets quiet and I'm outside at dusk, I glance toward the tree line, half expecting to see that little pulsing light again. But it never comes back. I wasn't even sure if I should talk about this. Not because it's some crazy, unbelievable story, but because I still don't really understand what I saw. And I guess part of me doesn't want to admit how weird it all was. So I'm a wildlife photographer, mostly working in the Pacific Northwest. I spend a lot of time out in the forest, trying to get shots of birds, deer, sometimes bears. Lately, I've been using a drone to get aerial footage of the canopy, mostly to find animal trails and good spots to camp or hike. The drone gives me a view I can't get from the ground, and it's been useful, honestly. A few weeks ago, I went out to this patch of forest I'd been curious about. It's pretty dense, older growth, mostly fir and cedar, and the canopy is thick enough that not much light gets through. The drone footage looked amazing that day. Clear skies, good light, everything as expected. But when I got back home and started reviewing the footage, that's when things got strange. I was watching a clip where the drone was hovering over a part of the forest that looked pretty untouched. Nothing unusual on first glance, just the tops of trees swaying gently in the wind. But then, at one point, the canopy seemed to split. Not like a hole or gap I'd expect from a fallen tree or a clearing. It was more like the tops of the trees were pushed aside, parted like curtains, just for a second or two. The branches leaned away from each other at a sharp angle, making a neat gap, maybe 10 feet across. It almost looked like something large had pushed up from underneath. I rewound it several times. I checked for glitches, camera issues, or anything that might explain it. But the footage was clear. Steady drone, no sudden movement or vibration. The split in the canopy was real. What's weirder is there was no shadow or silhouette of anything above the trees during that moment. No blurry shape, no reflection of light, nothing to suggest a bird or helicopter, or even a cloud. Just the canopy parting, as if something unseen had forced its way through the branches for a couple of seconds and then disappeared. I showed the footage to a couple of photographer friends. They thought maybe it was wind gusts or the drone camera tricking out, but the way the branches moved was too deliberate. The split opened and closed smoothly, like someone carefully pushing the trees apart by hand, not random wind. After that, I started paying more attention when I went back to that spot. I used the drone again a few times, hovering over the same patch of forest, but I never saw the canopy split again. The trees moved naturally in the wind, like always. Then, a couple of nights after I first saw the footage, I was camped nearby. I had the drone with me and was charging the batteries inside the tent. I kept hearing these weird sounds from the woods. Not animal noises I recognized, more like soft clicking or tapping. It wasn't constant, but it was close, like something small moving carefully through the underbrush. I wasn't worried at first. I've camped in the woods a lot, and strange noises are normal. But this felt different. The tapping kept coming in intervals, maybe every 10 or 15 minutes. When I shone my flashlight into the woods, I didn't see anything unusual. No eyes reflecting back, no movement. I thought maybe it was woodpeckers, but the rhythm was off, and the noise didn't match anything I'd heard before. Around 3 a.m., the sounds stopped completely. That's when I noticed the wind had died down, but the trees felt heavy, almost like the air was thicker than usual. I tried to sleep, but something about that stillness was unsettling. The next morning, I went out to check my drone launch spot. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints or signs of animals that might explain the sounds. But the air smelled a bit off, kind of like burning wood, but faint, and there was no fire nearby. When I looked up, the canopy seemed normal. The trees were close together, branches overlapping like always. I packed up and headed back home. The strange thing is, after that night, I started feeling like I was being watched. Not like someone was there staring at me, but a kind of presence, like the forest wasn't as empty as I thought. Sometimes when I'm working at my computer editing photos or video, I get this feeling that something is just outside the window, hidden in the shadows. I'd check, but there's never anything there, just empty trees and the usual neighborhood noises. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts or aliens or anything like that. I like things that can be explained, and I've spent years in the wild, so I know the normal sounds and sights. But whatever I caught on that footage and the sounds that night don't fit any of that. I thought maybe it was just my mind playing tricks, or maybe the forest was reacting to something natural I didn't understand. I've gone back a few more times, tried to capture the moment again with the drone, but I haven't seen the canopy split or heard the tapping. I still don't know what I saw, and honestly, I'm kind of glad it hasn't happened again. But I keep watching that footage, rewinding it over and over, hoping to find some clue I missed. And every time, the trees just split open for a moment, then close back up, like nothing happened at all. I was flying a small private plane late one night, just a routine trip to drop off some paperwork at a nearby airport. Nothing special. Clear skies, calm weather, and mostly just me and the hum of the engine. I usually liked flying at night, honestly. It's quiet up there, and the city lights below look pretty cool. It's a good way to clear your head. Around 10:30 p.m., I was cruising at about 5,000 feet, just following the flight plan and chatting with air traffic control, ATC, on the radio. Everything was normal. Then, out of nowhere, I noticed a red blinking light off my left wingtip. At first, I thought it was another plane, maybe someone else on a similar route. I scanned around, but there wasn't any other traffic on my instruments. That was weird. I radioed ATC and asked, "Any traffic near my position, 5,000 feet heading northeast?" They came back almost immediately, sounding a bit puzzled. "Negative. No other aircraft within 100 miles of your position. Confirm your coordinates." I double-checked my instruments and gave them my exact location. They confirmed again. Nothing on radar, no flights scheduled nearby. That's when I looked out again. The red light was still there, just a little off to the left and slightly behind me. It blinked steadily, at about the same rate as a normal navigation light, but it wasn't moving relative to me. It was matching my speed and distance perfectly. I adjusted my speed a little, and the light did the same. I slowed down, it slowed down. I sped up, and so did it. For the next 10 minutes, I kept watching it, feeling a weird mix of curiosity and unease. I kept checking my instruments and the radar, but nothing showed up. The light just kept pacing me, blinking in that same slow, rhythmic pattern. I called ATC again, this time a little more concerned. "I'm seeing this red light just off my left. It's pacing me and matching my speed exactly. There's no traffic on your radar?" "Confirmed," they said. "Nothing on radar. No other flight plans in the area." I started running through options in my head. Could it be some kind of drone? That seemed unlikely at this altitude and distance from any populated areas. Maybe a weather balloon? But those don't blink lights or match your speed. Could it be some kind of reflection or instrument glitch? I shook my head. The light was clearly outside, and I could see it through the window. I pulled out my phone to try and take a picture through the window, but the glare and the movement made it impossible to get a clear shot. I considered grabbing my small handheld camera, but I didn't want to take my hands off the controls too long. I kept talking with ATC, trying to figure out if anyone else had reported something strange. Nothing. No calls, no warnings, nothing. After about 15 minutes of this, I decided to try a maneuver to see if the light would stay with me. I banked left sharply, dropping my altitude a bit. The The red light followed exactly, keeping the same relative position and blinking steadily. I straightened out and climbed back to 5,000 feet. It stayed with me, matching every move. I began to feel a little freaked out, not because it was a light in the sky, pilots see lights all the time, but because nothing about this made sense. No radar contact, no explanation, and it was acting like it was attached to me. Then, after about 20 minutes, the light just blinked twice and vanished. No fade out, no change in position, just gone. I stared into the darkness, expecting it to reappear, but it didn't. I radioed ATC again. That light just disappeared. Copy, still no traffic on radar. I tried to shake off the feeling and finish the flight without any more incidents. But even after I landed and parked the plane, I kept thinking about that light. What was it? Why did it pace me like that? And why wasn't it showing up on any radar or instruments? I checked with other pilots later, but no one else reported seeing anything unusual that night. ATC confirmed again the next day. No anomalies, no unregistered flights, no glitches. I've flown a lot, and I've seen strange things. Lights out of place, weird weather phenomena. But this was different. The steady pace, the perfect match in speed and position, and the complete absence from radar made it something I can't explain. I'm not one to jump to conclusions, and I don't want to say it was anything extraordinary, just a strange, unexplained experience that I keep turning over in my mind. It was there, matching me perfectly, then it wasn't. That's it. No crash, no missing time, no voices or weird sensations. Just a red blinking light that followed me for a while, then disappeared like it was never there. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened, and honestly, I'm still not sure what I saw. It wasn't some big, flashy thing, more like something small, quiet, and weird enough to make me double-check my own eyes. It was late summer, early evening. The sun had just set, but there was still some light left, that blue hour kind of glow. I was hanging out in my backyard, just messing around before dinner. Our backyard backed up to this little patch of woods, not a forest or anything, just a handful of trees that lined the edge of the property. Sometimes I'd go back there with my dog or just explore. That night, I was sitting on the grass near the fence, watching fireflies flicker around. Pretty normal stuff. But then I noticed something else, a small dot of light hovering just at the tree line. At first, I thought it might be a firefly or a bug caught in some weird way, but it wasn't blinking or flickering like the others. It was just steady, a soft white light. I stared at it for a while. It stayed in the same spot, just floating maybe a foot or two above the ground, right behind the biggest tree at the edge. The light was small, maybe the size of a marble, and it pulsed gently, like it was breathing or alive in some way. It didn't move side to side, just stayed there, pulsing evenly. I felt weirdly drawn to it, but also nervous. I didn't want to get up and walk into the woods alone, so I just sat there and watched. The light stayed steady for what felt like a few minutes. I remember the sounds of crickets and the faint rustling of leaves, but the light didn't change or flicker like any insect I'd ever seen. Then, without warning, the light started to rise. It didn't float sideways or drift with the breeze. It went straight up, slow and steady, passing the tops of the trees like they weren't even there. I blinked, expecting maybe it was some kind of drone or balloon, but the way it moved was too smooth, too deliberate. As it rose, the light got smaller, just a pinprick against the darkening sky. Then it disappeared completely, like it just vanished into thin air. I sat there for a few minutes after that, waiting to see if it would come back or if something else would happen. Nothing. The woods were silent, the night settling in as usual. Eventually, I went back inside. I told my parents about it, but they just said I was probably seeing things or imagining stuff. I tried explaining the way it pulsed and rose straight up, but they didn't seem interested. My friends thought I was making it up or confusing it with a firefly. Later, I kept thinking about it. The pulsing light didn't feel natural, and the way it rose didn't match anything I knew. I've gone back to that backyard dozens of times since then, but I never saw anything like it again. Sometimes, when it gets quiet and I'm outside at dusk, I glance toward the tree line, half expecting to see that little pulsing light again, but it never comes back. I was fiddling with my radio setup late one night, just the usual stuff. I've been messing with amateur radio for a few years now, mostly local chatter, emergency frequencies, random stuff. It's a hobby, something to pass the time and keep my brain busy. That night, I was tuning through some less used bands, trying to catch any signals that might be out there. Around 2 a.m., I heard this weird repeating sequence on one of the frequencies I don't usually check. It was faint but clear enough to stand out from the static. It sounded like a voice, or maybe a computer-generated voice, repeating numbers over and over. At first, I thought it was some kind of test transmission or maybe a prank, but the pattern was too steady, too precise. The numbers were coordinates. I jotted them down, latitude and longitude. It wasn't a place I recognized offhand, but I figured I'd check it out in the daylight. I saved the recording on my laptop and went to bed, thinking it was probably nothing. But the coordinates kept bugging me. The next morning, I loaded the coordinates into Google Maps. It pointed to a spot about an hour outside town, somewhere in the middle of a national forest. Not exactly a popular hiking area, just thick woods and some dirt roads. I thought, what the hell, I've got the day off. I might as well see what's there. I packed a small bag, water, flashlight, my radio gear just in case, and drove out to the spot. The road got rough and narrow as I got closer, but I made it to a little clearing the GPS showed as the exact coordinates. At first, it looked like any other patch of forest floor, just dirt, leaves, pine needles, that kind of stuff. Then I noticed the ground was different in one area. A perfect circle, about 10 feet across, completely blackened. The edges were sharp, like someone had burned that spot clean, but weirdly contained. It wasn't just charred leaves or branches. The dirt itself looked scorched, like it had been burned from something intense. I knelt down and touched it cautiously. The ground was warm, not hot, but warmer than the surrounding earth, like it had been heated recently. I checked my watch. It had been maybe a day or two since the radio transmission, so it seemed strange for the heat to last that long. I scanned around for any sign of campfires or human activity, but there was nothing. No footprints, no trash, no tire tracks, nothing. I pulled out my radio and tried tuning back to that frequency. At first, I heard nothing but static, but then the signal came back, the same sequence of numbers, repeating steadily. It was faint, but definitely there. I recorded it again, this time from the site. I stood up and looked around. The forest felt different here. Quiet in a way that wasn't normal. No birds, no wind rustling through the trees, just silence, thick and heavy. I felt like I was being watched. But when I scanned the woods with my eyes and flashlight, I didn't see anything. I packed up and started walking back to my truck, but on the way, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Something small and dark darted behind a tree. I stopped and stared. Whatever it was, it moved silently and quickly, disappearing before I could get a good look. Back at the truck, I looked at the recordings. The voice, or whatever it was, kept repeating the coordinates. No other sounds, no explanation, just those numbers over and over. That night at home, I kept hearing static on my radio even when I wasn't tuned to that frequency. Sometimes faint tapping or clicks, almost like Morse code but scrambled. I recorded it hoping to make sense of it later, but I never did. The weirdest part? I started losing chunks of time, small gaps where I couldn't remember what I was doing. Not like passing out, but moments just missing. I'd be doing something normal, walking to the kitchen, checking my phone, and then suddenly I'd be somewhere else, unsure how I got there. I told a friend about it, and he suggested maybe I was stressed or sleep deprived, but I wasn't. I was fine before all this started. I went back to the site a few days later, like hoping to find something new, but the circle was gone. No scorch marks, no warmth, nothing unusual. Just normal forest floor, as if whatever had been there never existed. I've tried to ignore it, but sometimes I'll catch that frequency again, those numbers repeating. And sometimes I think I see shadows moving just beyond the edge of the trees near my house, shapes that don't belong. I still don't know what it was or what it wanted. All I have are those numbers and that burned circle, and the feeling that something was watching, waiting. I spend a fair bit of time tracking satellites. It's just a hobby, really, but I like the quiet of it. The way you can sit outside at night, phone or tablet in hand, watching tiny dots move across the sky, knowing they're machines built by people thousands of miles away. It's calming, and it makes me feel connected to something bigger, even if it's just technology. One night last fall, I was out on my back porch, just after dark. The sky was clear, crisp air, not a cloud in sight. I was using an app that shows satellite positions in real time. It's pretty neat. You tap on a satellite, and the app tracks it as it moves overhead, showing you where it is, how fast it's going, and when it'll disappear from view. I was watching one of the usual ones, nothing special, just the ISS or a weather satellite, something like that. The dot was moving steadily along its usual path. Then I noticed something weird. Another satellite popped up on the list, one I hadn't tracked before. It showed up on the edge of the screen, a little red dot, not the usual white or yellow like the others. I tapped it. That's when things started to feel off. This red dot was moving in a way that didn't make sense. Instead of gliding steadily across the sky, it was zigzagging. Not small course corrections, but sharp, jagged turns, like it was dodging something or trying to stay out of sight. The speed changed too. Sometimes it slowed almost to a stop, mid-sky, hanging there like it was paused, then would dart off again. The app showed no change in altitude or anything that would explain the movement. It just looked wrong. I tried to zoom in, hoping maybe it was a glitch, some weird bug in the app, but the movement was consistent. It didn't flicker or jump like a glitch would. It was deliberate. I started tracking it more closely. As the minutes passed, it kept moving in that weird pattern, zigging and zagging like nothing I'd ever seen before. It didn't follow any orbit I knew about, and it certainly didn't move like any satellite should. At one point, it seemed to slow down to a crawl, almost stopping above a cluster of trees at the edge of my neighborhood. That's when I noticed the silence. Normally, when I'm outside tracking satellites, I hear the usual nighttime sounds, the distant hum of cars on the highway, crickets, the occasional dog barking. That night, all of that felt muted. The usual noises seemed distant, like the world was holding its breath. I told myself it was just me being focused, but it stuck with me. I kept watching the red dot as it hovered, then suddenly it darted upward fast, like it was leaving the atmosphere. Then it stopped again, this time higher, like it was waiting for something. The rest of the satellites on my app kept moving smoothly, but this one was jerky, erratic, unpredictable. After about 20 minutes, the satellite just disappeared. No warning, no slow fade, it was just gone from the app. The list updated, and it wasn't there anymore, like it never existed. I sat there staring at the empty space where it had been, feeling a mix of confusion and a strange unease. I tried refreshing the app, restarting my tablet. Nothing brought it back. I checked online forums and satellite tracking sites, but no one else had reported anything like it. The next few nights, I kept watching the skies, hoping to catch it again. Sometimes I'd see faint, quick blips on the edge of the app, but they never behaved like that first time, and they never lasted. The red dot was a one-time thing. I kept thinking maybe it was some kind of test satellite or a drone launched by a government agency, but none of that made sense either. Why would it move like that? Why disappear without a trace? Why make the night feel so quiet, like something was watching or waiting? I don't have any answers. Just that one night, a satellite, or something like it, didn't behave like it should. And for those minutes, I felt like I was looking at something that wasn't meant to be seen. I was out on my usual solo sailing trip, nothing fancy, just me, my boat, and a week of clear skies and open water. I've done this a few times a year for years now, mostly to get away from everything and just clear my head. This trip wasn't supposed to be any different. The first few days were exactly what I expected. Calm seas, the sound of waves against the hull, the occasional call of a gull. I'd wake early, check the weather, adjust my sails, and spend hours just watching the horizon. There's something about being out there, away from land, that makes everything else feel distant, peaceful even. On the fourth evening, just after sunset, I was sitting on the deck watching the last light fade. The sky was a deep blue, stars just starting to peek through. The ocean was calm, almost glassy, reflecting the colors of the sky. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was some kind of debris floating on the water. A piece of wreckage, maybe, or a container lost from a ship. It was about 100 meters off the starboard bow, sitting right on the surface of the water. What caught my eye was that it was perfectly round and shiny, like polished metal, and it wasn't moving with the waves. I squinted and adjusted my binoculars. It looked like a disc, flat and smooth, maybe 8 or 10 feet across. There were no markings, no rust, no signs of wear, just clean, reflective metal. I didn't hear anything. No engine noise, no buzzing or humming, just the quiet slap of water against my boat. I've seen a lot of weird stuff at sea, driftwood that looks like faces, strange floating nets, seals popping up unexpectedly, but nothing like this. It wasn't drifting or bobbing. It seemed to be hovering, like it was floating just above the water. I blinked and looked away for a second, then looked back. The disc had tilted a little, just a subtle lean, maybe 10 degrees. Not like it was tipping or sinking, more like it was adjusting its angle, shifting gently. Then, without a sound or splash, it disappeared. Not sunk or submerged like something dropping under the surface, but vanished entirely. The water around it didn't ripple or bubble, nothing moved out of place. One moment it was there, the next it wasn't. I scanned the spot with the binoculars, but the disc was gone. I circled the boat slowly, eyes peeled, but there was no sign of it anywhere. Just open water stretching out in every direction. I sat there for a while, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. It wasn't a boat, it wasn't debris, and it definitely wasn't something natural, yet there was no noise, no disturbance, no evidence it had just disappeared. The rest of the night was quiet, but uneasy. I kept glancing toward where it had been, half expecting to see it come back or some other sign. I checked the radio, no chatter, no reports from nearby vessels. The sky stayed clear, the stars steady. The next day, I told a few fishermen when I stopped in at a small harbor. They gave me strange looks. One said maybe it was some kind of drone or experimental craft, but none of the others had heard anything about something like that in the area. Another thought I might have been seeing things. I wasn't hallucinating. I'm used to long hours alone, and I know when my mind's playing tricks. This was real. That night, while anchored near the coast, I kept replaying the moment over and over. The stillness, the silence, that impossible smooth disc, just sitting there, untouched by waves or wind. I don't know what it was or why it was there. It didn't make a sound, didn't try to communicate, and didn't do anything that felt hostile or threatening. It just existed for a moment, then vanished like a whisper. When I got back home, I checked the weather, maritime reports, anything that might explain a floating metal disc appearing and disappearing in the middle of the ocean. Nothing. I still think about it when I'm out on the water now, not with fear or excitement, but with a quiet confusion, like I saw something that's not supposed to be there and still can't wrap my head around it. I was out on the ranch just before dawn, walking along the fence line like I do most mornings, checking for any damage or loose posts. It's something I've been doing for years, so I know every inch of that fence like the back of my hand. That morning felt normal at first. The air was cool, a little mist hanging low over the fields, and the sky was starting to lighten. But when I got to the west corner of the property, something was off. A section of the fence, about 20 feet long, was completely taken apart. Not just knocked down or broken, but every post was pulled out of the ground and laid neatly in a pile next to the fence line. The wooden posts were stacked straight and even, like someone had gone through carefully disassembling them piece by piece. The wire, usually stretched tight between the posts, was coiled in a perfect circle next to the pile, almost like thick rope. I walked around the spot a few times, trying to figure out what happened. No tire tracks, no footprints. The ground was dry but undisturbed except for the hole where each post had been pulled up. It looked like the fence was never there. The grass around the spot wasn't crushed or bent. Nothing suggested a vehicle or heavy equipment had been used. I have horses, and sometimes they get loose when fences break, but this wasn't the usual. Normally, if a fence is down, there's some kind of damage or signs of a struggle. This was too clean, like it was carefully taken apart and put aside. I didn't see or hear any animals near the spot either. I snapped a few pictures with my phone and texted them to a neighbor just to see if anyone else had noticed anything strange. He said he hadn't, but I could tell he thought it was weird too. We both shrugged it off as some odd prank or maybe a group of kids messing around, but the problem was I live far enough out that random people coming onto the property isn't common. And if someone had been there, why leave it so neat? Why not just rip it down or steal some wood? That day, I checked the rest of the fence more carefully than usual. Everything else was fine, no signs of tampering. I figured I'd call a local handyman to come out and help me put the fence back up. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I got. That evening, I took the dogs out for a walk near that same spot, hoping to see if I missed anything. The sun was setting, the sky streaked with pink and orange. I kept my eyes peeled for anything unusual, tracks, signs of people, animals, anything. But the ground was exactly how I'd left it in the morning, no new marks. The stack of posts and wire looked untouched. As I stood there, I heard a faint hum, almost like a distant engine or maybe an electrical sound, but there were no cars or tractors anywhere nearby. It lasted only a few seconds, then stopped. I looked around, but all I saw was the empty field and the line of trees in the distance. I told myself it was probably just my imagination, or maybe a plane passing overhead, but it felt different. Oddly close, but no visible source. The next morning I went back out again. This time I brought a flashlight and a handheld GPS to record the exact spot. When I got to the fence, the pile of posts and wire was still there, exactly where I left it. But something else caught my eye. A series of tiny scratches on the top edges of the posts. I didn't notice them the day before. They were shallow but looked deliberate, like someone had taken a small tool and scored the wood. I ran my fingers over the marks. They didn't look random. I tried to imagine why someone would do that, but I couldn't come up with a reason. The scratches didn't match any kind of animal claw marks I'd seen. Over the next few days, I kept an eye on the spot. Nothing changed. No signs of anyone coming back, no more noises or weird sounds. The posts stayed neatly stacked, the wire coiled just the same. I thought about moving the pile myself, but something about it felt off. Like if I disturbed it, I might trigger something I didn't understand. One afternoon, while I was fixing a gate on the other side of the ranch, I glanced toward the pile from a distance. For a moment, the fence posts seemed to shimmer slightly, almost like they were vibrating or bending at the edges. I blinked and rubbed my eyes, but when I looked again, they were normal. I told myself I was just tired. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that fence and how it didn't add up. I thought about calling a few people, maybe someone who deals with fence repair or local wildlife experts, but I worried they'd just think I was crazy. The next day, I finally decided to move the posts and put the fence back together. As I picked up the wire, my skin crawled. It was heavier than it looked, thicker than usual. The metal felt cold, almost icy, even though the air was warm. The wire wasn't rusted or old, but it had a faint smell I couldn't place, like burnt rubber mixed with something metallic. I worked for a few hours reassembling the fence, using my usual tools. Nothing else happened. No noises, no lights, no strange feelings. Just me and the quiet of the land. After I finished, I took a step back and looked at the fence line. The posts were in place, the wire tight. It looked normal again. That night, I heard the hum again. It was softer this time, almost like it was coming from under the ground. I couldn't tell if it was outside or inside my head. I stayed awake for a while, but it faded after a few minutes. In the following weeks, life went back to normal. The fence held, the animals stayed in, and the ranch stayed quiet. But sometimes when I walked past that corner, I'd get a feeling like I was being watched. Not by a person, not by an animal, but something else. A presence, maybe. I never saw anything, no lights or shapes. Just that feeling. The scratches on the posts never faded, and if anything, they seemed to get clearer, like they were carved deeper over time, but I never touched them again. I don't know what happened that morning, how the fence could be taken apart so perfectly, with no footprints or tracks, no sign of how or who. I keep thinking about the hum, the scratches, and how the wire felt heavier than it should. The whole thing just doesn't fit any explanation I have. I told a few friends, but they shrugged it off or joked that maybe the fence was just tired and wanted a break. But I'm not joking. That's the story. The fence was there, then it wasn't, and no one came to take it apart. At least no one I can see. Um, I was on a red-eye flight from Denver to Boston, flying solo to visit my sister for the weekend. It was one of those late-night flights where most people are either asleep or zoning out, and the cabin lights are dimmed low. I'm not great at sleeping on planes, so I ended up with the window seat, hoping the view might help pass the time. About 2 hours in, the plane had climbed above most of the clouds, and outside, it was mostly dark with patches of thick clouds here and there. I was staring out, watching the moonlight skim over the tops of the clouds when something caught my eye. There was something moving just below the cloud level, pacing alongside us. At first, I thought it was another plane, but it didn't have any lights on. No blinking red or green, no steady white light on the tail or wings, nothing at all. Just this dark shape that seemed to follow our flight path perfectly. I blinked a couple of times, trying to make sense of it. The shape was faint, mostly a silhouette, but it reflected some of the moonlight, enough to make out a smooth, rounded shape, almost like a disc. It was definitely bigger than any drone I've seen, but it was moving exactly with us, matching our speed. I looked around the cabin a bit. Most people were asleep or watching movies. I didn't want to say anything because I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or if someone else would see it too. I kept staring, hoping for a better look. Over the next 20 minutes, the thing kept pace just below the clouds, sometimes disappearing behind a thicker patch, then reappearing on the other side. Every time I thought I could get a better look, it slipped just out of clear view. No noise, no blinking lights, just that vague, dark shape mirroring the plane's path. I tried to figure out what it could be. Another plane with lights off didn't seem right. Air traffic control wouldn't allow that. A drone that high and that size seemed impossible. A weather balloon? But they don't move like that, and they're usually lighter than air, drifting with the wind. After a while, I pulled out my phone to check the flight tracker app, just to see if there was another plane close by. The app showed nothing near us except our own flight. No nearby aircraft within miles. I started to feel a little uneasy. There was something about how the shape moved. It wasn't just pacing, it seemed to be watching the plane, matching its speed exactly, but never overtaking or falling behind. It felt deliberate. About an hour in, I noticed something else. My watch and phone had lost signal completely. No data, no calls, no messages. The plane was way too high and over remote areas, so maybe it was normal, but I'd had signal earlier and it never usually cuts out entirely for so long. That's when I realized I had no idea how much time had passed. The little screen on the seat back showed the flight progress, but it felt like the plane wasn't moving forward the way it should. The clouds outside looked off, like they were frozen in place or moving weirdly slow. I checked the app again. It still showed the plane on the same spot and no other flights nearby. The pacing shape stayed just outside the cloud cover, always in that blurry, half-seen state. I noticed it never got closer or farther away. It just kept up. At some point, I caught myself holding my breath, staring out the window, trying not to blink. The crew made their usual announcements, but the voices sounded distant, like through a fog. I pressed the call button, asked the flight attendant if the flight was normal, and she gave me the usual reassuring answers about timing and weather, but her eyes seemed distracted, like she was half listening. I started looking around the cabin more closely. No one else seemed to notice anything strange, and the few people awake were absorbed in their screens or asleep. Then the pacing shape did something new. It tilted slightly, like it was angling its side toward the plane for a moment. The faint moonlight caught a thin rim of what looked like metal, reflecting a pale silver that wasn't natural. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds before it slipped back into the shadows. I thought about trying to take a photo, but my phone refused to open the camera app. It froze, then shut down and restarted on its own. The watch synced again with no signal, but the time on both was off by almost 20 minutes. At some point, I noticed the hum of the engine sounded different, quieter, almost muffled, but there was no change in the flight path or altitude on the screen. I kept watching, but the pacing shape began to slow, eventually hovering almost motionless below the clouds. It stayed like that for a few minutes, then vanished. No explosion, no light or noise. Just gone. I blinked, waiting to see if it would come back, but there was only dark sky and scattered clouds. The moon was still up, shining normally. My phone regained signal shortly after, and everything on the flight tracker jumped ahead suddenly. The plane was showing miles further along, as if time had caught up. The cabin lights gradually came back on as we began our descent. People woke up, stretched, got ready for landing like nothing unusual had happened. I kept staring out the window as the city lights appeared below, still trying to understand what I'd seen. Back on the ground, I checked my photos and videos. Nothing from the window seat, just dark, blurry shots of the clouds, no sign of that shape or the reflective flash. I don't know how to explain any of it. The pacing shape, the frozen time feeling, the loss of signal, nothing adds up. I told a couple of friends, but they just smiled and said maybe I was tired or seeing things. Maybe I was. But I'm still thinking about that shape pacing alongside the plane, silent and dark, always just out of reach. I was somewhere west of Kearney, Nebraska, when I first noticed the lights. It was a little after 3 in the morning. I'd been on the road since around 9 the previous night, hauling refrigerated freight from Indianapolis to Salt Lake. Pretty standard run. I usually take I-80 the whole way, long, straight, boring. I prefer it that way. I was in the middle of that dead stretch between towns where everything's just fields and sky. Not even billboards, just the occasional mile marker and the hum of the tires. I wasn't tired exactly. I'd had coffee in Grand Island, but I was zoning a bit. Cruise control was on, AM talk radio, turned down low, the kind of driving where you stop thinking about what you're doing. I only noticed the lights because they didn't move. They were behind me at first. I caught them in the mirrors. 3 white dots, all the same size, same brightness, spaced evenly apart. Not headlights. That was my first thought. Maybe a truck with weird running lights or someone hauling something unusual. But they were too high. Not above me, just higher than any headlights would be. At first, I figured maybe it was a plane, something banking slow or coming into alignment. But they stayed the same distance back, mile after mile. If it was a plane, it was keeping pace perfectly. After about 15 minutes, I started really watching. The spacing between them never changed. No blinking, no red or green nav lights, just white, like stars but too low and too bright for stars with the moon out. They weren't moving forward, just floating back there. I tapped the brakes once lightly, not enough to slow down much, just enough to see if they'd respond. Nothing changed. They held position, maybe half a mile back and slightly off the road to the left. No sound either. I rolled the window down to listen, but all I heard was wind and the highway. It started bothering me. I'm used to weird stuff on the road. People driving without lights, deer standing in the middle of nowhere, even drones once or twice. But this felt different. There was no behavior I could match it to. If it was a plane, why stay fixed behind me for that long? If it was a drone, who was flying it in the middle of nowhere at 3 a.m.? I passed an exit, just one of those little county roads with no services. I thought about pulling off, seeing if they followed. But I kept going. The thought of stopping didn't sit right with me. I don't know why, just felt wrong. After another 20 minutes, they were still there. I got this idea to flash my high beams. Not in any pattern, just quick on and off to see if they'd react. Nothing, not even a flicker. I kept checking the mirrors every 30 seconds. Sometimes I'd lose them when the road curved a little or dipped. But as soon as it leveled out again, there they were, perfectly spaced. At some point I looked at the dash clock. It was 4:06. I remember because I'd told myself I'd stop at the next decent truck stop after 4. I passed a rest area sign not long after that, but again, I didn't stop. The lights were still there, and I didn't like the idea of getting out of the cab. Then they moved. I was glancing in the left mirror when it happened. 1 second they were behind me, same position as always. The next second, they shot sideways, not forward, not toward me, sideways, all 3 at the same time, like they were locked together. No arc, no build-up, Just a straight horizontal shift across the sky, way faster than anything I've ever seen. They went from behind me to out over the open fields at maybe a 45-degree angle from the truck. Then they stopped again. I slowed down, actually hit the brakes this time. They stayed put. Not jittering or adjusting, just stopped like before. And then, maybe 10 seconds later, they zipped again. Straight up. Gone. Not faded. Just gone. I pulled over onto the shoulder, sat there with the engine idling, 4 ways on, just looking out over the fields. There was nothing. No sound, no motion, just the faint orange glow of the instrument panel and the crunch of gravel under the tires. I got out and walked a little ways from the truck. No traffic in either direction. Nothing overhead. Sky was totally clear. Moon to the west, stars out everywhere else. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes, not really expecting them to come back, just trying to make sense of it. Then I heard the engine stutter. I turned back, thinking maybe I'd accidentally tapped the key or the gear shift. But I was still in neutral, brakes set. The lights on the dash flickered once, then everything was normal again. I climbed back in, shut the door, and drove the rest of the way to North Platte without stopping. Never saw the lights again. I checked the mirrors more than usual that night. I was driving from Flagstaff to Bakersfield, taking the long way through the Mojave because I'd had enough of interstates and wanted a quieter route. It was just past 10 at night, maybe closer to 11. I remember because I was debating whether to stop somewhere or keep pushing through. I didn't have to be anywhere until the next afternoon, so I figured I'd drive until I got tired. I was somewhere past Ludlow, one of those stretches where you lose track of time because it's just flat road and empty desert, and your headlights picking out the same 50 feet over and over. No other cars, no signs, just a single-lane road and nothing else. The kind of silence that makes you lower the radio without even realizing it. The road had started to wind a bit, not sharp curves, but enough to keep me alert. I had the windows down to stay awake. Cool desert air coming in, dry and steady. I wasn't tired yet, but I was in that zone where your thoughts start to drift. I remember thinking about my old truck and whether I should replace the tires before winter. Dumb stuff. Then, somewhere past a big bend with no markers, I glanced in the rearview mirror. There were 3 lights behind me, faint, white-blue, all the same size and spaced evenly apart. Not headlights, too dim and too low, almost at the level of the road itself, but floating. Not high like a car's high beams and not spaced wide like a truck. They looked like orbs, not beams. No glow, just a soft presence. At first I thought it was a reflection, something bouncing off the glass. But when I tilted the mirror a little, they didn't move. They stayed locked in place, following. I stared at them for a few seconds, long enough to start drifting in my lane. When I corrected, I checked the side mirrors. Nothing. No lights behind me, but in the rear view, still there. Still floating low, still in perfect formation. I slowed down a little. Not much, just enough to see if they'd react. They didn't get closer or farther. They stayed exactly the same distance behind me, like they were matching speed. I pulled off the road a bit, just nudged onto the shoulder. No other cars had passed in over an hour, and there wasn't any real traffic to speak of. I figured I'd let them pass if it was someone screwing around with drones or something. I stopped and turned off my headlights. Engine still running. Then I looked in the mirror again. The lights were gone. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute, nothing came around the bend behind me. No sounds, no dust trail, just that low, constant wind moving over the sand. I got out of the car, left the engine running, walked to the back and looked up and down the road. Nothing. No signs of anything. No power lines, no fences. I even walked into the middle of the road and stood there, just listening. It was totally silent. Then I heard a crackle. Not loud, more like static coming from inside the car. I thought maybe the radio was acting up, so I leaned into the window and turned the volume knob, but it was already off. The noise was still there, soft and irregular, like something brushing against a microphone. Then it stopped. I turned off the engine, trying to listen better, and everything went dead. No more static, just the sound of wind again. I waited another minute, maybe more. Then I got back in and kept driving. For a while, everything felt normal again. I didn't see the lights. The road was just as empty as before, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. I kept checking the mirror every few seconds. I wasn't even thinking about it, it just became a reflex. About 10 minutes later, I started seeing movement on the side of the road. Not animals, not clear shapes, just shadows, like something ducking out of view when the headlights swept past. I told myself it was probably scrub or Joshua trees catching the wind, but a couple of times it looked like a figure crouching down, staying low. I didn't stop again. Then, without really noticing when it started, I realized I could see the three lights again. Not right behind me this time, off to the left. In the desert, maybe 50 yards out, gliding along at the same pace as my car. Still equidistant, still low to the ground. No beams, no visible source, just faint glowing points, moving over the terrain like it wasn't even there. I slowed down to about 40. They kept pace. I sped up to 60. Same thing. Always off to the side, just behind my peripheral vision. When I turned my head to look, they were gone. But when I looked forward again, they'd drift back into my edge of vision. It was like they didn't want to be looked at directly. Eventually, the road curved again and dipped into a small canyon. The terrain got tighter, rockier. I lost sight of the lights completely. They didn't come back. That should have been a relief, but it made me more anxious, like I'd lost track of something that had been watching me. I stopped again a little after midnight to get some water from the back seat. When I opened the door, the dome light flickered twice and didn't come on. Not burned out, just didn't activate. The dashboard lights were still on, but faint, like the battery was dying, even though the engine was fine. I closed the door, waited, tried the dome light switch manually, nothing. I got out the flashlight I keep in the glove box and aimed it around. The air felt heavier somehow. Still dry, still cool, but like something was pressing down a little. Then I noticed this faint humming. Not loud, not even rhythmic, just a low vibration like a power line or an engine idling far away. But there were no power lines out there, nothing man-made at all. The sound faded when I stepped a few feet away from the car, then came back when I moved closer again. I crouched down and put my hand on the ground, couldn't feel anything. The sound was in the air, not the earth. I checked under the car, around the wheels. Nothing. No leaks, no damage. But that hum kept going, just barely there, like it was circling me. I got back in and drove without stopping again until I hit Barstow. There were no more lights, no figures, no sound. But I couldn't stop glancing in the mirror the whole way. Even after I hit the city lights, I kept checking. Every few seconds. Like part of me expected to see those three faint points, perfectly spaced, floating behind me again. It was around 10:30 at night, early March, clear sky with a full moon. I remember that part because it was one of the only reasons I even went out. I don't usually jog that late, especially not alone, but I'd had a long day, my head was racing, and the weather was weirdly nice for the time of year. Cold but calm, no wind, no snow, dry pavement. I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town in northern Colorado. Lots of space between houses, not much light pollution. There's a stretch of road about 1.5 miles long that loops through some open residential area, undeveloped lots, ranch-style homes, fields, that kind of thing. No sidewalks, just asphalt and a narrow shoulder. I started off, like I always do, headphones in, sleeves rolled up a bit, slow pace at first. There was nothing weird at the beginning. A couple porch lights were on, but no cars passed me and I didn't see anyone else out. Just my breathing and the occasional crunch of grit under my shoes. I think I made it about 3/4 of a mile before something felt off. I can't explain it exactly, but the air got heavy, almost. Like it had weight to it. Not hotter, not colder, just thicker. I took my earbuds out, thinking maybe it was some kind of pressure drop or something with the weather, but everything was still dead quiet. No dogs barking, no insects, no wind in the trees, just nothing. And then I got that feeling, the being watched one. Everyone's had it. But this was sharper, more specific. Like I knew exactly where the gaze was coming from, directly above me. I stopped jogging and looked up, squinting because the moon was so bright. At first I didn't see anything, just the stars and that pale glow over everything. But then something moved. Not a light, not a streak. just the absence of stars, a triangle of black, low and slow. It wasn't completely invisible. You know how when a plane passes in front of stars, it sort of distorts the sky for a second? This was like that, but there was no engine sound, no blinking lights, and it was moving too smoothly. Not hovering, not wobbling, just coasting. Maybe 2 or 3 stories above the street, directly overhead. I stepped backward without meaning to, just instinct. I didn't hear anything, not even a breeze, but I swear I felt something, like a static charge. My arms broke out in goosebumps, even though I hadn't been cold before. The object was a perfect triangle, not a V shape like some stealth planes, more like an equilateral triangle with faint lines on the underside. I could only see them when it passed under the moonlight, not glowing or illuminated, just barely catching the light. I watched it for maybe 10 seconds. It wasn't going fast, maybe 10 or 15 miles an hour, but it didn't wobble or tilt or make a sound. Just kept going, and it was big. I don't know how to estimate size from below, but it was bigger than any small aircraft I've seen, maybe the size of a house. When it passed over the next row of trees and out of sight, I just stood there. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't running or screaming or anything. It felt more like my body didn't know what to do, like it didn't fit the list of threats I'm wired to react to. I stood still for maybe a full minute before I realized how quiet it still was. That was the worst part, honestly. The silence felt wrong. It didn't lift once the thing moved on. It just stayed. I turned around and started walking back the way I came. I wanted to run, but I couldn't. My legs felt heavy and twitchy, like after you've been startled real bad. I kept looking up, but the sky was empty again. Stars, moon, the usual. When I got close to my house, I saw that my porch light had turned off. It's one of those motion sensor ones, and it's never off when I come back, especially if I've left the timer on, which I always do. I walked up the steps, waved my arm at the sensor. Nothing. I flipped the switch inside. Still nothing. That light didn't come back on until the next day, and I didn't do anything to fix it. I checked the bulb, the wiring, everything looked normal. It just started working again later like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept listening for weird sounds outside, humming, static, anything. But there was nothing, just my own house creaking and settling like usual. A couple days later, I tried jogging that same loop again. It was during the day this time. Everything looked normal. Same trees, same open fields, same houses. I even looked up where it had passed over me. Nothing in the branches. No signs of scorching or disturbance. But I've never gone back out jogging at night since, not even with a flashlight. Just can't make myself do it. I was a highway patrol officer in northern Nevada for a little over 10 years. Most of it was routine. Long stretches of empty roads, speeders, the occasional drunk. Quiet work, mostly. Long hours, especially on night shift. This happened in January 2019. I remember the date because it snowed that afternoon and we'd had a rollover just south of Battle Mountain. I worked swing shift and stayed out a little late finishing paperwork in my cruiser. Around 2:30 a.m., I started heading back to the station, taking a long loop on a service road that runs parallel to I-80. That road barely gets used. No streetlights, no traffic, just flat sagebrush and a few old fence lines. I drove slow because of the black ice, maybe 45 tops. My dash cam was running the whole time like usual. Nothing stood out during the drive. I didn't pass anyone. No lights in the distance, no animals. It was a still, clear night, and you can usually see headlights coming for miles. I remember glancing in my rearview mirror once or twice and seeing nothing but darkness. I got back to the station just after 3 a.m., parked, and went inside to finish the rest of my shift. Nothing unusual. Didn't even think about the drive. The weird part didn't start until later that week. Every Friday, we do a basic check on our dash cam units. Make sure the footage synced, nothing glitched, that kind of thing. My sergeant asked if I could pull mine up from that Tuesday night, since I'd been out the latest. I loaded the file from 2 to 3, fast-forwarded through most of it, but something caught my eye. It was subtle at first, just 2 little dots of light behind my cruiser. Faint, but clear. Headlights. They showed up on the footage around 2:41 a.m. I paused the video and sat there for a second, trying to think back. I hadn't seen any headlights. I would have remembered if someone was following me out there, especially that close. But in the footage, they stayed right behind me for several minutes, not tailgating, just pacing me, maybe 100 yards back. I scrubbed through the next few minutes. The lights stayed behind me the whole time, never closing in, never falling back. I checked my side mirrors in the footage. Nothing, not a single glint, just blackness. But in the dash cam, those lights were there. At 2:48 a.m., the road bends slightly to the left around an old drainage ditch. I remember that stretch clearly because there's a row of old wooden posts and I always slow down there in case of ice. In the footage, I dipped slightly left, same as always. The lights behind me dipped too, and then they were gone. No pass, no fade. They just blinked out like someone flipped a switch. One frame they were there, the next they weren't. I rewound and played it again, slower. Still the same. They trailed me for almost 7 minutes, then disappeared at that bend. I kept watching the footage, but nothing else stood out. Just me, driving the rest of the way alone. I checked the timestamp again. The lights were first visible at 2:41:13 and vanished at 2:48:06. I looked at the speed I was doing, about 43 miles per hour the whole time. That meant whoever it was would have had to stay perfectly paced behind me, without headlights visible in my mirrors, for 7 minutes. Then, vanish. I pulled up the rear camera too, same story. Lights in the distance, following, then gone. But again, nothing showed in the mirrors. We use decent equipment. The cameras are mounted high with night vision. They record continuously. There's no chance those lights came from inside the car. No reflection, no interior glare. I brought my sergeant in and showed him the segment. He just watched quietly and said, maybe it was a logging truck or someone hunting jackrabbits. But he knew that stretch. It's fenced off and not near any turnouts or access roads. Plus, if it was a vehicle, it should have shown in my side mirrors. It didn't. I asked if the unit had any lens flare issues. He shook his head, said it had been serviced 2 weeks earlier. I kept thinking about the angle. How could the camera catch headlights that I couldn't see with my own eyes? I replayed it over and over, slowing it down, watching the mirrors, the dash, the road. Everything looked normal, just those lights hanging back in the dark. I asked dispatch to check if any other units were in that area at the same time. Nothing. Checked 911 logs for that night. No calls, no breakdowns, no activity at all on that stretch. I even went back out there the next night. Same time, same route. I parked for a while near that bend. Nothing happened. No cars, no lights, just empty road and cold wind. I watched the footage from that night too. No lights behind me at all, not even a distant glow. The thing that stuck with me was how steady the lights were. Never bouncing, never flickering. Just 2 solid points, low to the ground, like normal headlights. But they never swayed or changed distance, even over uneven road. I've driven that stretch hundreds of times. If someone was out there with a vehicle, I would have seen them. Or heard something. But there was nothing, just those lights following for 7 minutes, then gone. I kept the footage. It's saved in a private folder. I didn't file an incident report. There wasn't anything to report, really. No crime, no damage. Just something that doesn't make sense. It never happened again. I was out walking my dog one night, just like I did most nights, around 10 p.m. The neighborhood was quiet, mostly just the sound of my dog sniffing the grass and the occasional car passing way off in the distance. I usually liked these walks because it gave me some time to clear my head after work, away from the noise and the screen. That night, the air felt different. Not cold exactly, but heavy, like something was pressing down a little more than usual. I didn't think much of it at first, just the usual late fall stillness settling in. I was halfway down the block when my dog stopped dead in his tracks, ears perked straight up. He stared up toward the treetops at the end of the street, his tail low but stiff. I looked up too, expecting to see a bird or maybe a plane, but there was nothing moving. Then I saw it. It was this shape, hovering maybe 30 feet above the tops of the tallest trees. Perfectly still. It wasn't blinking or shining or anything like that, just a dark shape. No wings, no movement, no sound. It didn't look like any bird or drone I've ever seen. It was kind of oval, maybe the size of a large car or a small van, but because it was so still and silent, it was hard to tell. The edges weren't sharp, they blended a bit with the dark sky. It almost looked like a shadow, but it was definitely three-dimensional. I blinked a couple of times, thinking maybe my eyes were messing with me. My dog growled low, a quiet rumble in his throat, and tugged on the leash. I was frozen for a minute, just staring at it. The neighborhood was still dead silent except for the sound of my dog shifting his weight, watching that shape. After maybe a minute, the shape just vanished. It didn't move away or drop down, it simply disappeared like someone switched off a light. I looked around. Nothing. The trees moved softly in the breeze, the streetlights cast long, yellow pools of light, but no sign of whatever it was. My dog kept looking up for a few more seconds, then finally pulled me forward like he wanted to get away. I started walking again, but my heart was pounding. I kept looking back the whole way home, expecting to see it again, but the sky was empty. The next day, I told a coworker about it, and he joked maybe it was a UFO. I laughed, but inside, I wasn't so sure. Over the next few nights, I kept going on the same walk. Nothing. No shape, no silence, no feeling like I was being watched, just the usual quiet. Then, 3 nights later, it happened again. Almost exactly the same spot, almost the same time. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see it again, but as I passed the corner, there it was. The same dark, still shape hovering above the treetops. No sound, no movement. This time I had my phone with me, but when I tried to get a video, the screen wouldn't focus on it. It just showed a black blur where the shape was. The camera acted like there was something there, but nothing my eyes could capture. I stood there longer this time, watching it. The street was completely silent again, even the wind seemed to have stopped. My dog was stiff, alert, but didn't bark. Then the streetlights flickered briefly. The shape didn't move, but the light flicker felt like a warning or a signal. After about 5 minutes, the shape slowly began to fade, like it was dissolving into the night sky, and then it was gone again. I went home that night feeling weird. It wasn't fear exactly, more like confusion mixed with unease. I kept thinking about what it could be. I tried to talk to a few neighbors over the next week, but nobody else had seen or heard anything unusual. It was like it was just me. One evening, a few days after the second sighting, I was sitting on my porch when I noticed something else odd. There was a soft, pulsing glow coming from the edge of the woods behind the houses across the street. It wasn't bright or steady, just a faint shimmer that lasted maybe 10 seconds, then disappeared. I stared at it, wondering if it was some weird light from a campfire or a reflection, but nothing was out there. No cars, no people. The whole neighborhood was quiet again. I mentioned it to my partner, but they just said I was letting my imagination run wild. Maybe I was. I don't know. A few nights later, I was on my walk again. This time, the shape didn't appear, but I felt like something was different. I kept hearing this low humming sound, very faint, almost like the kind of noise you get when you're near an electric transformer. But when I looked for a source, there was nothing. No transformers nearby, no power lines. The humming wasn't steady. It would fade in and out, always around the same spot near the treetops. I started feeling uneasy, like I was being watched, but every time I turned to look behind me, no one was there. No shadows moving, no sounds other than the humming. On one walk, I took a different route just to see if the feeling followed me. It did. The humming was there, quieter maybe, but still there. I didn't tell anyone else because I didn't want to sound crazy. Then one night, something else happened that unsettled me more than anything. I was about to turn down my street when my dog suddenly jerked toward the sidewalk and growled. I looked up and saw 2 small, dim lights flickering just above the tree line. Not like car headlights, more like tiny pinpoints of light that seemed to pulse and shift slowly. They weren't the dark shape from before. These were small, bright, and moving very slowly, almost hovering. I blinked, and they disappeared. I stood there frozen, and my dog was still growling low. After a few seconds, I decided to head home. The rest of the walk was silent, but the feeling of those 2 lights hovering there stayed with me. When I got home, I locked all the doors and windows and tried to shake the feeling. Over the next week, I kept expecting to see those lights or the shape again, but they didn't show. The weirdness didn't stop though. Sometimes I'd find my dog staring up at the sky, ears perked, but nothing visible there. Sometimes I'd notice the street lamp flickering, just like before. One night, I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. because the room felt bright. I looked out the window and saw a soft white glow coming from the woods across the street. I stared at it for a few minutes, but it never got brighter or moved. Then it faded away slowly. I couldn't sleep after that. After a while, the lights and the shape just stopped appearing. The humming faded. The street lamp stopped flickering. But even now, months later, I still catch myself glancing up at the treetops, waiting to see if that dark shape will come back or those tiny lights will flicker again. I don't know what it was. I don't know if anyone else saw it. And I don't know why it chose that quiet little neighborhood, or why it waited for me to be out there walking my dog at exactly the same time. It just happened. And I'm still not sure if it was real or just something my eyes wanted to see on a quiet night. I worked the night shift at a gas station just off the highway for a few months last fall. It wasn't much, mostly the usual. A couple of drunks stopping for beer, truckers grabbing snacks, the occasional late-night traveler pulling in for gas. Nothing out of the ordinary, really. But there was this one thing that started happening a few weeks in, and I never could explain it. Every night, around 2:17 a.m., this silver sedan would pull up and park directly across the street from the station. Not in any of the nearby parking spots, just on the side of the road, right under this old street lamp. The weird part? Nobody ever got out of the car. The engine would turn off, the headlights would go dark, and the whole thing would just sit there. Silent. Empty looking, but no one ever moved it. I first noticed it when I was stepping outside for a cigarette. The glow from the street lamp made the car's paint look almost metallic, like it was polished to a mirror finish. The windows were tinted, but not so dark that you couldn't see inside at all. The seats were empty every time I glanced over. At first, I thought maybe someone was hiding out in there, waiting for someone, or maybe it was stolen and abandoned. But the car was always clean. No dust, no leaves or bugs on it, nothing that would suggest it'd been sitting there for days. It showed up the same time every night, 2:17 a.m., almost like clockwork, and it was gone by the time I finished my shift around 6 a.m. I mentioned it to a couple of regular customers and coworkers, but no one else had seen the car. I figured maybe I was imagining it or seeing things in the dark. But then I got a little more curious. One night, I decided to take a better look. I finished up inside, locked the station door behind me, and walked slowly across the street. The air was chilly, and the only sounds were distant crickets and the faint hum of passing cars on the highway. The sedan was there, exactly where I expected, sitting perfectly still. I circled it once, looking for anything unusual. The tires were all fully inflated, the windshield was spotless, no notes stuck to the door or windshield, no scratches, no dents, just a clean, silent car. I stared inside. No one. I called out, "Hey, is someone in there?" Nothing. The car didn't respond. I half expected some kind of answer, even a muffled one, but the street was quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. That night, I felt like I was being watched. Not by anyone I could see, but like something was paying attention to me from the darkness beyond the street lamp's reach. I shook it off and went back inside. A few nights later, I decided to set up my phone to record outside the window. I wanted to catch whatever it was on video, or maybe prove to myself I was just losing it. I set the phone on the counter facing the window and let it record through my whole shift. When I checked the footage the next morning, the car did show up at exactly 2:17 a.m., just like always, but something was off. The headlights never came on, but the street lamp's light around it dimmed slightly, like the car was absorbing some of the glow. The weirdest part was how the air around the car looked on video. It shimmered, like heat rising off pavement on a hot day, but the night was cold. It wasn't fog, just this slight distortion, like the space around the car was bending or vibrating. I didn't say anything about it, not even to myself at first. I was already feeling uneasy, and the last thing I wanted was to convince myself I was seeing ghosts or something worse. Then one night, about a week later, something new happened. The car showed up at 2:17 a.m. as usual, but this time, a figure appeared inside. I saw it from the corner of my eye, a shadowy shape shifting behind the windshield. I froze, unsure if I'd really seen it or if my brain was messing with me. The figure didn't move or get out of the car. It was just there, sitting still. The interior lights never came on, but the outline was definitely human. Maybe a man, but I couldn't tell for sure. The figure didn't wave, didn't look at me, just sat facing forward. I watched it for maybe 5 minutes, heart racing, feeling like I was trespassing by just looking. Then the figure vanished. I blinked, and it was gone. I checked outside immediately, but the car was empty again. No one anywhere nearby. That's when the quiet started changing. I began hearing noises around the station late at night, faint tapping sounds like someone was knocking on the walls. But no one was there when I went out to check. Sometimes the fluorescent lights inside the station flickered. Once, the power cut out for exactly 30 seconds. No storms, no outages reported anywhere nearby. When the lights came back on, the car was gone, and I was alone. I kept trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe a prank or an animal messing with the wiring. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. One night, I tried to confront it. When the car arrived, I stepped outside, crossed the street again. I called out, "Who are you? What do you want?" No answer. The figure didn't appear that time, just the empty car sitting silent. I stood there for a while, but my nerves got the better of me. I walked back to the station and locked the door behind me. After that, the car kept showing up every night at the same time, but the figure never came back. A few times I thought I saw headlights far down the road, like someone was watching me from a distance, but every time I looked directly, there was nothing. The strangest thing happened on my last night working there. Around 2:17 a.m., the car pulled up, but the street lamp above it went out completely. Total darkness, except for the faint glow of the gas station's sign across the street. I watched the car, waiting for the figure, the shimmer, anything. Nothing happened. Then slowly, the car just vanished. I mean, it wasn't driving away. It was just gone. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't. I stepped outside, looked around. No tire tracks, no signs it had moved. It was like it disappeared into thin air. I told the manager I was done after that night. I wasn't sleeping well, and the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. I never saw the car again after I quit, but sometimes when I'm driving late and past that stretch of highway, I swear I catch a glimpse of something silver just sitting under that old street lamp waiting for 2:17 a.m. I was out for my usual morning jog, the kind I do almost every day before work. That morning was different though. Thick fog had rolled in overnight, so everything was muted, like the world had been wrapped in a gray blanket. The streets were empty except for me, and the usual noises of the neighborhood felt softened, almost swallowed up by the mist. I was about halfway through my route when I came up on the old stone bridge near the river. It's not a big bridge or anything, just a couple lanes over a small creek, but it always felt a little eerie, especially in the fog. The stone is covered with moss and the creek water runs dark and slow beneath it. I'd passed under that bridge hundreds of times before, never thinking much about it. That morning, as I got closer, I started feeling this weird pressure in my ears, like when you're on a plane going through turbulence and your ears pop. But I was standing still, and it wasn't the usual pinch or discomfort. It was stronger, more intense, and it didn't go away. It was almost like my head was underwater, or like someone was slowly tightening a clamp around my skull. I stopped right under the bridge, trying to shake it off, hoping it was just some weird sinus thing from the cold air. I put my hands over my ears and breathed through my mouth, but it didn't help. The pressure just stayed there, low but persistent, and it started to make me dizzy. I glanced around, expecting maybe some loud noise or construction or something, but the fog was thick and the street was completely silent. No cars, no people, no birds, just this dull, heavy quiet. Then I noticed the ground right next to the sidewalk under the bridge. There was this patch of frost, perfectly circular, maybe a little bigger than a dinner plate. I'm pretty familiar with the area, and I knew for a fact it hadn't been there when I ran past that spot earlier that morning. The air was cold but not freezing, and the rest of the ground was just damp, no frost anywhere else. This patch looked fresh, like it had just appeared. I stared at it, confused. It was like a perfect white ring on the dark asphalt. No footprints leading to it, no tire marks, nothing. Just this weird, cold circle sitting there alone. I looked back up at the bridge and felt the pressure in my ears spike again. I wanted to move, but my legs felt heavy, almost numb. The fog seemed to close in around me, and the silence grew thicker. I checked my phone to see what time it was. 6:18 a.m. No messages, no missed calls. But the screen flickered for a second, like the brightness was adjusting on its own. Then it went back to normal. I thought maybe I was just imagining things or getting overheated from the jog, so I shook my head and started walking again. The pressure in my ears stayed, though it eased off a bit as I got away from the bridge. About 100 feet down the road, I heard something. A soft tapping sound, like someone drumming their fingers on metal. I stopped and looked around, but the fog swallowed everything. No cars, no people. I called out hello, but my voice sounded muffled, like it was coming from far away. The tapping stopped instantly. I told myself it was probably Ranch hitting a street sign or something small like that, and kept moving. Still, the feeling of being watched settled in behind me. I checked over my shoulder a few times, but the fog made it impossible to see much. When I reached the park at the end of my run, things got even stranger. I pulled out my water bottle from my bag, and the cap wouldn't budge. I twisted and twisted, but it felt like it was sealed shut tight, almost glued. After a minute of struggling, it popped open, and a sudden cold rush of air came out, like the bottle had somehow been chilled all night, even though I had left it inside my warm apartment. I shrugged it off, trying to focus on finishing my jog, but my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from an unknown number. The message was blank. I checked the screen carefully. No characters, no spaces, nothing. Just a completely empty message. I deleted it, thinking maybe it was a glitch, but then my phone screen flashed black for a second. When it came back on, my battery was suddenly at 20%, even though I had charged it fully the night before. I decided to head home. On the way back, the pressure in my ears came back again, but stronger. It was like being underwater, but also like a really loud noise was trying to push through my skull. I put my hands over my ears and slowed down, but it didn't get better. I passed the bridge again, this time from the other side. The frost patch was gone. I stopped and looked around. The fog felt thinner now, the sun starting to rise and burn it off. But there was something else. On the opposite side of the street, near a clump of trees, I thought I saw a shape, tall, thin, standing perfectly still. It wasn't a person, not really. Too tall, too still. I blinked, and it was gone. I got home and locked the door behind me. I spent the day feeling off, like my head was full of static. My ears kept popping on and off, and every so often I'd catch a glimpse of that circular frost patch in the corner of my eye. But when I turned to look, there was nothing there. I checked my phone again before bed. No messages, no glitches, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there that morning. Watching, waiting under that bridge. And I keep wondering what that frost patch was, how it appeared and disappeared without a trace, and why my ears felt like they were about to burst for no reason at all. I haven't gone jogging under that bridge since. It started the morning after I got back from a late night out. I woke up, groggy, checked my phone, and noticed the time was just after 6 a.m. I looked down at my wrist and caught the watch I always wear. It had stopped. The second hand was frozen exactly at 3:33 a.m. That alone was odd, but what really got me was the phone. I always keep my screen on overnight to track my sleep and notifications. I pulled up the logs, and there was this weird gap, 27 minutes exactly, where nothing was recorded. No screen activity, no notifications, no movement at all. Like my phone had just shut off and turned back on silently. I'm not super into conspiracy theories or UFO stuff, so at first I thought maybe my watch battery died or the phone glitched, but it was a new watch and it had never stopped before. Also, my phone battery was almost full when I went to bed, and the gap didn't match any kind of restart I ever saw. I didn't think too much of it that day, but when I looked again that evening, the watch was still stuck at 3:33. I tried resetting it, but it wouldn't move. The phone was working fine now, but that gap stayed the same in the logs. Nothing weird happened for the rest of the day, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was off. That night, I went to bed around 11:30 p.m. Like usual, I left my phone on the nightstand and glanced at my watch just before shutting off the light. It was still stuck on 3:33. That's when I noticed the silence in the room was different, heavier somehow. It felt like the air had weight. I rolled over, eyes closed, but couldn't sleep. My mind kept drifting back to the watch and the gap in the phone. Then I heard it, a soft buzzing sound, almost like a radio tuning between stations, but faint. I turned my head slowly toward the window, but there was nothing out there but darkness. The buzzing stopped as quickly as it started, and I figured maybe it was just tinnitus or something in my ears. Still, I couldn't get comfortable. I kept checking the watch, willing it to move, but 3:33 was frozen in place. Over the next few days, weird things started happening around the house. Lights flickered for no reason. Sometimes the thermostat would change on its own, and I could swear I saw shadows moving just outside the corner of my eye. But every time I looked directly, nothing was there. One evening, I was cooking dinner when I heard the buzzing again, louder this time, coming from the living room. I followed it, expecting maybe the old radio or one of the kitchen appliances acting up, but all the devices were off. The sound stopped as soon as I flicked on the light. I started recording on my phone, hoping to catch it again, but nothing showed up. No sound, no interference, no glitches. The watch never changed. It stayed frozen at 3:33. I took it to a watch repair shop, but they said it was fine internally. The battery was good, nothing mechanical was broken. They couldn't explain why it wouldn't tick past that exact time. That night, I was lying in bed, phone on the nightstand, watching the clock on the wall tick closer to 3:33 a.m. I kept waiting to see if the watch might move, but it stayed stuck. At exactly 3:33, my phone screen suddenly went black for a moment, then lit back up with no notifications or anything. I checked the logs the next morning and found another silent gap, this one exactly 27 minutes long, starting right at 3:33 a.m. I couldn't figure out what was happening. Was I losing time? Was the phone freezing and rebooting silently? Was the watch somehow tied to this? One night I stayed up, determined to catch whatever was going on. I sat in my living room with my phone recording audio and video, and the watch on the table in front of me. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2 a.m., and still the watch wouldn't move. The buzzing came and went again, soft, almost a whisper, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. When the clock hit 3:33, the buzzing got louder, like a swarm of bees, but inside my head rather than in the room. My phone screen flickered, then the recording paused for exactly 27 minutes before resuming. The watch still showed 3:33. After that, I stopped wearing the watch. I kept it in a drawer, but every time I saw it, I felt uneasy. The phone's silent gaps kept appearing, always 27 minutes long, always starting at 3:33 a.m., but nothing else ever happened. No messages, no calls, just that blank space in time. I checked the watch one morning a few weeks later, and the second hand was moving again. It had somehow reset to the current time, like nothing had happened. The phone log showed normal activity during that same period. I still don't know what was real or what wasn't. All I know is that for those weeks, something was happening in that tiny stretch of time every night. And the watch was frozen like it was marking that moment. I don't wear the watch anymore, but sometimes I'll glance at a clock or my phone around 3:33 and feel that same odd weight in the air, like the world is holding its breath for just a bit longer. I was out for my usual evening jog through the neighborhood. It wasn't late, maybe just after 8 p.m., and the sun had already gone down. It was one of those quiet suburbs where everything feels kind of asleep by nightfall. Streetlights flickered on at regular intervals, and the houses all looked dark except for a few dimly lit windows. I liked running here because it was peaceful, and honestly, it helped clear my head after a long day. I had headphones on, but I kept the volume low, just enough to drown out my own breathing and footsteps. I was halfway through my usual route when I noticed a flicker of light behind me. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from a car's headlight or maybe a porch light blinking. But there weren't any cars coming down the street, and the houses around me were still dark. The light flickered again, faint, like a little spark way in the distance, and then it was gone. I slowed down and glanced back, but there was nothing there. Just empty street and shadows. No person, no bike, no car, no dog walker. I shrugged it off and kept going, telling myself it was probably just some weird trick of the streetlights or a bug flying close to the lens of my glasses. A few minutes later, the same thing happened. That flicker of light popped up again, just behind me, always just far enough away to be hard to see clearly. I turned around again, scanning the street, but the place was empty. The silence felt heavier than before. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I started paying more attention. Every time I glanced back, there was that flicker of light. Not every second, but often enough to make me uneasy. It never came closer, never changed position, and I couldn't tell what was producing it. It wasn't like a flashlight or a phone screen. It was too faint and too irregular, like a candle flame struggling in a breeze. I tried not to let it bother me, but the feeling of being watched crept in. My legs kept moving, but my head kept darting backwards. I checked the houses on both sides, still dark, no signs of life or movement. At one point, I stopped completely and listened. The street was silent except for the distant hum of a lawn sprinkler somewhere down the block. The light flickered again, farther this time, just at the edge of a cul-de-sac. I felt like I was being pulled toward it somehow, like it wanted me to notice it. I pulled out my phone and opened the flashlight app, thinking maybe I could catch whatever it was. I shone the beam back down the street, slowly scanning the empty road and sidewalks. The light vanished. There was nothing there. I started running again, but my pace was slower now, cautious. Every few seconds I'd catch that faint flicker behind me. It never came closer, never made any sound. Just that little light, like it was trying to stay hidden in plain sight. At one point, I reached the small park near the end of my route. It was completely dark, no streetlights at all. The trees made strange shadows that moved in the breeze. I stopped to catch my breath, and the flicker appeared again, just beyond the edge of the trees. I pointed my phone's flashlight toward it, and for a second, I thought I saw a shape. It was vague, just a silhouette that blended with the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. There was no rustling of leaves or movement, just silence. I didn't want to stay there longer, so I turned and jogged toward home, glancing over my shoulder the whole time. The light stayed with me, never getting closer, never leaving, just flickering softly like a distant warning. When I got back to my street, the flicker vanished. I stopped running and stood outside my house, trying to shake off the feeling. I locked the door behind me and sat down with a cup of tea, but the quiet from outside didn't settle inside my chest. That night, I kept waking up, feeling like someone was still there, watching from the darkness just beyond the window. I never saw the light again, but I'm pretty sure it's still out there somewhere, flickering just out of reach. I was out in the woods just past sunset trying to get some shots of deer and maybe a fox if I was lucky. I mostly do wildlife photography, nothing fancy, just the usual birds, deer, squirrels. That evening, I had my usual gear with me, plus my infrared camera. I like to use the IR cam for night shots sometimes because it picks up heat signatures, so you can see animals moving around in the dark, even if you can't spot them with your eyes. The forest where I was is pretty dense, with thick pine trees and underbrush. The trails are quiet, not many people go out there at night. I like it that way, peaceful and dark, except for the sounds of the forest. I set up my gear on a small clearing about half a mile in. The sun was just dipping below the horizon, the sky still faintly orange. I had my infrared camera running, watching the screen for any signs of animals. After about 20 minutes, I caught a few deer moving in the distance, their warm bodies glowing white on the IR screen. Normal stuff. Then something caught my eye. About 50 yards from where I was sitting, near a cluster of trees, The IR camera picked up a shape moving slowly through the forest. It was perfectly round, like a big circle drifting through the trees. The weird part was that it didn't show up like a normal heat signature. It was completely dark on the infrared, meaning no heat at all. Just a perfect black circle moving steadily along, like it was gliding. At first, I thought maybe it was a camera glitch or a shadow, but it moved smoothly and consistently, not like a bug crawling on the lens or a smudge. I switched my regular night vision on, just to see if I could catch a glimpse of it with my own eyes, but there was nothing there. No light, no shape, just the usual dark forest. The circle moved slowly, maybe a couple of feet per second, weaving between trees without breaking a branch or disturbing leaves. It felt unnatural, like something out of place. I watched it for a few minutes, trying to figure out if it was some kind of animal, but there's nothing round or flat that moves like that in the woods. I raised my voice to call out, thinking maybe someone was playing a prank or there was some equipment I didn't know about, but the forest just echoed my shout back at me. No answer. The shape disappeared after about 5 minutes, slowly moving toward a thicker part of the forest where the trees grow closer together. I kept watching, but it didn't come back out. I packed up my gear after that and started hiking back to the trailhead, but the whole time I kept feeling like I was being watched. Not just by animals, but something else. Every now and then I thought I caught movement in the corner of my eye, like a shadow shifting between the trees. But when I looked directly, nothing was there. I checked the footage from the IR camera again once I got home. The black circle was there on every clip from that time, smooth, silent, heatless. I tried to find a natural explanation, maybe a cold object reflecting no heat, or a piece of plastic or something floating in the air, but it didn't make sense. It moved steadily on the ground, not falling or drifting in the wind. Since then, I've gone back to that spot a few times, usually around dusk. The forest feels different, heavier somehow. The air is colder than it should be, and that feeling of being watched is almost constant. I've seen the circle a couple more times, always moving the same slow way, always without heat or sound. I don't know what it is. It doesn't make any sense. But it's there, drifting through the trees just beyond the edge of what I can see or understand.